He made a promise as a boy to always find his best friend, no matter what. But then, the boy vanished. 50 years later, a stranger hands Keanu Reeves a letter that begins, "He always believed you'd come." What Keanu discovers next will uncover a bond stronger than time, and a truth no one ever saw coming. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The Vancouver evening had settled into a comfortable chill, the kind that made Keanu grateful for the weight of his wool coat as he stepped out of the community center. The fundraiser for local youth arts programs had been small by Hollywood standards, but meaningful in ways that mattered more to him. Genuine conversations, passionate volunteers, and not a single red carpet or flashbulb in sight. He nodded goodbye to the organizers and started toward the waiting car, his breath forming small clouds in the October air. The parking lot was mostly empty now, street lights casting long shadows across the asphalt. Most attendees had already departed, leaving behind that particular quiet that follows gathered humanity. A space once filled now returned to stillness. "Mr. Reeves?" The voice came from his left, female and hesitant. Keanu turned to see a young woman standing a few feet away. She was perhaps in her early 30s, with dark curly hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that seemed both nervous and determined. Nothing about her triggered recognition, yet something in her posture, the way she stood with her weight slightly forward, as if caught between approaching and retreating, made him pause. "Yes," he replied, his tone gentle, accustomed to unexpected encounters with strangers. "I'm Claire Dawson." She took a step closer, her hands clutching what appeared to be an envelope, worn at the edges and yellowed with age. "I've been trying to find the right moment to give you this all evening." Keanu maintained the polite distance that experience had taught him, his expression friendly but guarded. "What is it?" "A letter," she said, extending the envelope toward him. "From my father." He accepted it automatically, turning it over in his hands. The paper was soft with age, the corners rounded from handling. On the front, in faded blue ink, was a single name, Keanu. The handwriting struck him with the force of physical memory. Neat, deliberate letters with a distinctive curve to the K that he hadn't seen in half a century but would have recognized anywhere. His thumb traced the ink, a sensation like touching a ghost. "Micah," he whispered, the name emerging unbidden. Claire's eyes widened. "You remember him?" It wasn't a question, but Keanu nodded anyway, his focus still on the envelope. "Micah Dawson." The name felt strange in his mouth, familiar yet distant, like recalling a word from a language once spoken fluently but long abandoned. "We were friends when we were kids. In Toronto." "Best friends," Claire corrected softly. "According to him." Keanu looked up at her then, really seeing her for the first time. The shape of her eyes, the set of her jaw. Echoes of a boy he had once known, now reflected in the face of a woman who hadn't existed then. "You're Micah's daughter," he said, the reality of it settling in. "How did you find me?" Claire smiled slightly. "It wasn't that hard. You're Keanu Reeves." A fair point. He returned the smile, then looked back at the envelope in his hands. "And Micah? Is he—" "El passed away 3 months ago," Claire said, her voice steady despite the weight of the words. "Pancreatic cancer. It was quick, at least." "I'm sorry," Keanu said, the inadequacy of the phrase not lost on him. 50 years of separation reduced to 2 words of conventional sympathy. "He asked me to find you," Claire continued. "Actually, he made me promise. Said you'd understand about promises." Something shifted in Keanu's chest, a tectonic movement of memory. He carefully opened the envelope, trying not to tear the aged paper. Inside was a single sheet, folded 3 times. As he unfolded it, a small photograph slipped out. 2 boys, arms slung around each other's shoulders, gap-toothed grins facing the camera. One was unmistakably himself, at 12 or 13. The other was Micah, taller even then, with a wild mop of curly hair and eyes that seemed to contain more laughter than a single moment could hold. The letter began simply, "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and my daughter found you." Just like I said she would. Keanu's hand trembled slightly as he continued reading. "I don't know if you remember the promise we made under that oak tree in Greenwood Park. I've carried it with me all these years, not as a burden, but as proof that once someone saw me, really saw me. Before life scattered us in different directions, before fame found you and obscurity found me, we were just two kids who swore we'd always find our way back to each other. I watched your journey from afar, every film, every interview, not as a fan, though I was that too, but as the friend who always knew you had galaxies inside you. You kept your promise, Keanu, even if you never knew it. You found me in all the ways that mattered. Now I'm asking Claire to find you, not for closure, I don't believe in that, but for continuation. Some stories don't end, they just change narrators." The letter continued for another paragraph, but Keanu found he needed to pause, his vision blurring. He looked up to find Claire watching him with quiet patience. "Would you like to sit down?" she asked, gesturing to a nearby bench. He nodded, grateful for the suggestion. They walked in silence to the bench and sat, the envelope and its contents cradled carefully in Keanu's hands. The night had deepened around them, stars emerging in the clear Canadian sky. "He talked about you all the time," Claire said after a moment. "The adventures you had, the trouble you got into, that treehouse you tried to build that collapsed after 3 days." A laugh escaped Keanu, startling in its suddenness. "We used his foster dad's good hammer, got grounded for a week, and the time you both decided to run away to Hollywood on your bikes but only made it to the edge of the neighborhood before you got hungry. We had peanut butter sandwiches and $2 between us," Keanu recalled, the memory surfacing like a bubble from deep water. "We were so sure it would be enough." They shared a smile, connected by the thread of a man who had loved them both. "When did you last see him?" Claire asked. Keanu's smile faded. "The summer we were 13. His foster family moved suddenly, no forwarding address. I tried to find him, but you were just a kid," Claire finished for him. "Yes." The simplicity of the acknowledgement was somehow freeing. Just a kid who lost his friend. He returned to the letter, reading the final paragraph. "If you're willing, Claire has more to share. My life wasn't remarkable, but it was mine, and you were always a part of it, even in absence. Perhaps especially in absence. Some lights don't need proximity to guide us home. Always, Micah." Keanu carefully refolded the letter and returned it to its envelope, along with the photograph. When he looked up, memories were flashing behind his eyes like an old film reel. Bike rides through Toronto neighborhoods, comic books read aloud with dramatic voices, secrets shared in the shadows of a flashlight after bedtime, and a final promise made beneath the spreading branches of an oak tree. "I'd like to hear more," he said to Claire, his voice soft but certain. "About your father. About the years I missed." Claire nodded, her expression a mixture of relief and something like wonder. "He said you'd say that. He said you always kept your promises." As they rose from the bench and walked toward the parking lot, the stars continued their ancient patterns overhead, unmoved by the small human drama unfolding beneath them. Yet for Keanu, the universe had just shifted, realigned by the words of a ghost and the presence of a stranger carrying fragments of his past. Toronto, summer 1973. The air hung heavy with humidity, the kind that made t-shirts stick to skin and turned hair wild with frizz. Greenwood Park shimmered under the July sun, its playground equipment too hot to touch, its grass patchy and worn in the places where children played most often. The city's distinct scent, a mixture of hot pavement, street vendor food, and the distant tang of Lake Ontario, wrapped around everything like an invisible fog. At the eastern edge of the park, where shade from mature trees offered respite from the relentless heat, two boys pedaled their bikes in lazy circles, neither in a hurry to be anywhere else. At 13, they inhabited that precarious edge between childhood and whatever came next, still young enough for unself-conscious play, but old enough to sense the approaching shadows of adulthood. "I bet you can't jump that bench," Micah called, pointing to a wooden park bench positioned beneath a sprawling oak tree. Keanu grinned, accepting the challenge without hesitation. He circled back, gathering speed, his second hand Schwinn wobbling slightly as he approached the makeshift ramp they'd positioned near the bench. The front tire hit the incline, and for a suspended moment, both boy and bicycle were airborne. A perfect silhouette against the summer sky. Then gravity reclaimed them, and Keanu landed with a jarring thud that rattled his teeth, but didn't diminish his triumph. "Your turn," he shouted, wheeling around to face Micah. Micah hesitated, taller than Keanu by nearly 4 inches. He'd hit a growth spurt that left him gangly and uncertain in his new dimensions. His foster parents' refusal to replace his too small bike didn't help. But Keanu was looking at him with expectation, not doubt. And that made all the difference. "Watch this," Micah said with forced confidence. He backed up further than Keanu had, compensating for his bike's limitations with extra speed. The approach was perfect, the takeoff promising, but the landing betrayed him. The frame of the bike shuddered, then collapsed, sending Micah sprawling onto the sun-hardened dirt. Keanu was off his bike in an instant, rushing to his friend's side. "Are you okay?" Micah sat up slowly, assessing the damage. His palms were scraped raw, his left knee bleeding through torn jeans. But it was the bike that drew his immediate concern. The chain had snapped, and something in the frame had bent at an angle that didn't bode well for easy repair. "Mr. Larson's gonna kill me," Micah said quietly, his voice tight with the effort of controlling his emotions. "He told me if I broke anything else, I'd be sorry." The weight of the words hung between them. Keanu knew enough about Micah's situation to understand that sorry could mean many things, none of them good. In the 18 months since Micah had been placed with the Larsons, he'd accumulated a careful catalog of their moods and triggers, developing the hypervigilance common to children whose security was never certain. "We'll fix it," Keanu promised. "My stepdad has tools. He won't mind if we use them." Micah looked unconvinced. "Your stepdad's cool. Mr. Larson isn't." He prodded the broken chain with his toe. "This is the third home in 2 years. If they send me back, who knows where I'll end up next?" There it was, the fear that lived just beneath the surface of every conversation with Micah, the shadow that followed him even on the brightest days. Since his parents' death in a car accident when he was 8, stability had been a concept rather than a reality. Families took him in, then decided they couldn't handle his nightmares, or his silence, or eventually his anger. He was shuttled through the system like an inconvenient package no one quite knew where to deliver. Keanu had met him on his first day at their school, when Micah was still wearing clothes that smelled like the previous home and flinching whenever someone moved too quickly. Somehow they'd recognized something in each other, a kinship of displacement, perhaps. Keanu, with his transient upbringing, understood what it meant to always feel slightly out of step with the world around you. By lunchtime, they were inseparable. Now, looking at his friend's defeated posture, Keanu felt an urgent need to shore up the crumbling ground beneath him. "Come on," he said, grabbing their intact bike. "We can walk to my place from here." They pushed the broken bicycle between them, the comfortable rhythm of their friendship temporarily disrupted by worry. As they passed beneath the oak tree's spreading canopy, Micah stopped suddenly. "I might not be able to fix it in time," he said. The words seemed simple, but Keanu heard the layers beneath them. "Mr. Larson gets home at 6. Then you'll stay at my place tonight," Keanu replied, as if it were the most obvious solution in the world. "Mom won't mind. We'll call and tell them you're sleeping over. They don't let me sleep at friends' houses. Too much trouble, they say." "Then we won't ask." The clarity of Keanu's conviction was startling, even to himself. "We'll just do it." Micah looked at him with a mixture of hope and doubt. "You'd get in trouble, too." "So?" Keanu shrugged. "We're blood brothers, remember?" He held up his palm, where a faint scar from their ritual the previous summer still showed. Two boys with a safety pin and solemn vows about friendship that transcended ordinary bonds. Micah's expression softened. Yeah, but no buts. We stick together. That's the rule. They continued walking, but something had shifted in Micah's demeanor. A tension released, if only temporarily. When they reached the massive oak tree at the center of the park, Micah gestured to a patch of shade beneath its sprawling branches. Can we sit for a minute? My knee hurts. They propped the bikes against the trunk and settled on the ground, backs against the rough bark. The tree was ancient by park standards, its trunk too wide for even both of them together to encircle with their arms. Local legend said it had been standing since before the city was built, a silent witness to the land's transformation from wilderness to urban center. If I have to move again, Micah said after a long silence, promise you won't forget me. The words landed like a stone in still water, ripples of implication spreading outward. It wasn't an idle question. 3 friends had already passed through Micah's life and disappeared when their families moved away. Each departure carved a new hollow in a heart already too familiar with absence. I'd never forget you, Keanu said immediately. You're my best friend. But what if they send me far away this time? What if we can't write or call? Keanu considered this, understanding the fear behind the question. Then, with the absolute certainty only a 13-year-old can possess, he made a declaration. No matter what, I'll always find you. Micah looked skeptical. How? I don't know yet, but I promise, even if it takes years, I'll find you. The solemnity of the moment seemed to demand something more. Keanu pulled out his Swiss Army knife, a recent birthday gift, and carefully carved their initials into the tree bark, KR plus MD. Now it's official, he said, pocketing the knife. Sworn on the tree. Micah ran his fingers over the rough-cut letters. Sworn on the tree, he repeated, the words taking on the weight of ritual. They didn't know then that within 5 days Micah would be gone, moved to another city with no chance to say goodbye, no forwarding address, no way for a 13-year-old boy to fulfill his earnest promise. They didn't know that life would pull them in vastly different directions, that fame would find one while obscurity enveloped the other. All they knew in that moment, beneath the ancient oak tree in Greenwood Park, was the perfect certainty of their friendship. A bond they believed stronger than distance, than time, than all the forces that might conspire to separate them. And in their innocence, perhaps they were right. The diner Claire had suggested was exactly the kind of place Keanu preferred. Unpretentious, quietly busy. The type of establishment where celebrities weren't the most interesting thing that happened on any given day. They'd chosen a booth near the back, away from windows and casual glances. The waitress had recognized him, but maintained a professional distance, bringing coffee and taking their order with nothing more than a slightly lingering smile. This was one of my dad's favorite places, Claire explained, stirring cream into her coffee. He used to bring me here for breakfast on Saturdays when I was little. Keanu glanced around, taking in the worn vinyl seats, the slightly chipped mugs, the comforting scent of coffee and pancakes. It was the kind of place where life happened in small, significant moments, the backdrop to countless family conversations, first dates, friendly reunions. The thought of Micah sitting in one of these booths, perhaps in this very spot, created an odd sensation of time folding in on itself. Tell me about him, Keanu said, wrapping his hands around his mug. Your father, what kind of life did he have? Claire looked down at her coffee, as if gathering her thoughts from the swirling cream. A quiet one, mostly. He never had much in terms of money or possessions, but he gave me everything that mattered. She smiled slightly. He was a high school English teacher for most of my life. Before that, he worked construction, drove a cab for a while, tried his hand at a dozen different things. And your mother? Keanu asked gently. She died when I was 8. Breast cancer. Claire's voice remained steady, but her fingers tensed around her mug. Dad raised me by himself after that. Never remarried or even dated much, as far as I knew. Keanu nodded, absorbing this information. Cancer seemed a cruel echo, taking both of Micah's parents, then his wife, and finally Micah himself. Some patterns refused to be broken. What was he like? He asked. As a person, I mean. Thoughtful, funny in this quiet, unexpected way. He could go hours without speaking, then say something so perfectly timed it would make you laugh for days. Claire's expression softened with memory. He read constantly. Our apartment was more books than furniture, and he wrote. Journals, stories, poems, nothing published, but that never seemed to bother him. He wrote for himself, not an audience. The waitress arrived with their food, a stack of blueberry pancakes for Claire, eggs and toast for Keanu. They thanked her and fell into momentary silence as they began to eat. He talked about you, Claire said after a few bites. All through my childhood. My friend Keanu this and Keanu and I once did that. I thought you were just another kid from the neighborhood, you know. Then one day, I'm 10 years old, sitting in a movie theater, and there you are on screen. She laughed. I nearly fell out of my seat. Dad, I whispered. Keanu is the Keanu? Keanu smiled at the image. What did he say? Bill just nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. Told you he was special, he said. Something tightened in Keanu's chest. The idea that Micah had followed his career, had pointed him out to his daughter with pride rather than resentment or envy, it spoke to a generosity of spirit he wanted to believe he would have shown in the same position. Did he ever try to contact me? Keanu asked, the question that had been circling his mind since he'd received the letter. Claire shook her head. Not directly. He said it wouldn't be fair. He has his life now, he'd say, and I have mine. Could have reached out, Keanu insisted, a hint of frustration coloring his tone. I would have answered. I know. And I think he knew that too. Claire hesitated, then continued. But my dad, he had a complicated relationship with his past. The foster system wasn't kind to him. By the time he aged out at 18, he'd been through 8 different homes, 2 group facilities. He used to say he learned early that people leave, so it was better if he left first. Keanu absorbed this, connecting it to the boy he had known. Always slightly guarded, always ready with a reason why he couldn't stay over another night, or attend a birthday party, or join a team sport. Even then, Micah had been practicing the art of not getting too attached, of keeping one foot perpetually raised for flight. He kept a shoebox, Claire continued, filled with things from your friendship. Pictures, notes, little mementos. When the cancer diagnosis came, and we knew it was terminal, he would sit with that box for hours. I think he was trying to put his memories in order, deciding what to pass on and what to take with him. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through some photos, then turned it toward Keanu. The image showed a man in his early 60s, thin but not frail, with a full head of silver-streaked dark curls and the same expressive eyes Keanu remembered. He was sitting in what appeared to be a hospital bed, but his posture was upright, alert, his smile genuine despite the circumstances. This was about 2 weeks before he died, Claire said, still making jokes about the hospital food and flirting with the nurses. Keanu studied the image, searching for the boy he had known in the man Micah had become. The connection was there, in the slight tilt of his head, the way his smile pulled more to the left, the thoughtful gaze that had always seemed to see beyond surfaces. Never complained, Claire said, taking the phone back. Not about the cancer, not about anything, really. He faced it like he faced everything, with this quiet dignity that made everyone around him try to be braver too. She fell silent, lost momentarily in her own memories. Then, with deliberate focus, she returned to her pancakes. Keanu did the same, respecting the pause, understanding that grief required these small intermissions, moments to breathe between immersions in the past. The strangest thing, Claire said eventually, was how he talked about you during those last weeks, not as the famous actor everyone knows, but as if you were still that kid he'd known in Toronto. He'd say things like, Keanu would love this book, or Keanu and I would have had so much fun with these pain medications." She smiled at the memory. It was as if, in his mind, there was no gap between then and now. "Maybe there wasn't," Keanu said quietly. "Not for him." Claire nodded. "I think you're right. And I think that's why finding you was so important to him. Not for some dramatic deathbed reunion. He explicitly didn't want that. But because he needed to close the circle somehow. To make sure I understood that some connections don't break, even when they stretch across decades of silence." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, carefully wrapped package. "He wanted you to have this. He said you'd understand why." Keanu accepted the package, its weight suggesting a book or similarly shaped object. He began to unwrap it, but Claire stopped him with a gentle hand. "Not here," she said. "He was specific about that, said you should open it somewhere quiet, somewhere you can sit with it for a while." Keanu nodded, respecting the instruction. He tucked the package into his jacket pocket, next to the letter he'd already read multiple times since receiving it the night before. "Did he suffer?" he asked, the question emerging before he could consider its weight. "At the end, yes," Claire answered honestly. "But he wasn't afraid. He said he'd made his peace long ago with where we go when we leave here." She stirred her coffee, though it needed no further mixing. "The night before he died, he was mostly unconscious, but he woke up suddenly and grabbed my hand. 'Tell Keanu,' he said, 'that I kept watching. Tell him I saw everything.'" The words hung between them, both mysterious and perfectly clear. Keanu felt their impact physically, a pressure behind his sternum that was neither pain nor pleasure, but some complicated blend of both. "Thank you," he said finally, "for finding me, for sharing this with me." "He said you'd say that too," Claire replied with a small smile. "He said you always did the right thing, even when no one was watching." As they finished their meal in companionable silence, Keanu found himself wondering about the strange symmetry of life. How a promise made by two boys beneath an oak tree could travel through 50 years of separation, connecting them even now, when one was gone and the other so drastically changed by time and circumstance. Some promises, it seemed, refused to be forgotten. After breakfast, Claire invited Keanu back to her hotel room. "I have something else for you," she explained as they walked through the lobby. "Something too big to bring to the diner." When they entered her room, Keanu immediately saw it. A weathered shoebox sitting on the desk, its cardboard softened at the corners from years of handling. The once white surface had faded to a soft ivory, and the lid bore smudges where fingers had repeatedly lifted it, as if the contents inside were consulted often. "Dad's memory box," Claire said, closing the door behind them. "He wanted you to have it, all of it." Keanu approached the box slowly, feeling an unexpected nervousness. This container held fragments of a shared past that only he now remembered, moments preserved by Micah across 5 decades, while life had carried Keanu in directions neither boy could have imagined that summer in Toronto. "Would you like me to stay while you look through it?" Claire asked, her tone gentle. "Or would you prefer some privacy?" "Stay," Keanu said without hesitation. "Please. I might have questions only you can answer." Claire nodded and settled into one of the room's armchairs, giving him space but remaining present. Keanu sat at the desk and carefully removed the lid from the shoebox. The scent reached him first, a mixture of old paper and something faintly mechanical, like pencil shavings or typewriter ribbon. It triggered a cascade of sensory memories. The school library where he and Micah would hide during lunch, the corner drugstore where they bought comic books, the musty basement where they attempted to build a radio from a kit that never quite worked. On top of the box's contents lay a folded piece of construction paper, its once vibrant blue now faded to a soft sky color. Keanu opened it carefully, mindful of the ancient tape holding the torn edges together. It was a homemade comic book titled The Two Stars, the childish lettering instantly recognizable as his own. Beneath the title, in Micah's neater script, "Written and illustrated by K.R. and M.D. Kept this," Keanu murmured, turning the fragile pages. The comic told the story of two space explorers discovering a new planet. The artwork was ambitious, if not entirely successful. Wobbly spaceships, alien creatures that looked suspiciously like dogs wearing antennae, stars that varied wildly in size and shape. But there was an energy to it, an earnest creativity that transcended its technical limitations. "He used to read this to me when I was little," Claire said, smiling at the memory. "He did all the voices. The alien leader had this ridiculous British accent." Keanu laughed, remembering. "That was my contribution. I was going through a phase where everyone evil had to sound like my mom's boyfriend at the time." He set the comic aside and continued exploring the box's contents. Next came a school photograph. Two boys with their arms slung over each other's shoulders, wearing identical Toronto Blue Jays t-shirts. The image was slightly blurry, as if the photographer had caught them in motion or couldn't get them to stand still long enough for a proper pose. "We saved up for those shirts," Keanu recalled, studying their young faces. "Mowed lawns all spring. Micah's was too big and mine was too small, but we wore them anyway." "He'll kept his," Claire said. "It's still in his closet at home, unwearable now but too precious to discard." Beneath the photo lay a carefully folded piece of lined paper, its creases so deeply set that Keanu worried it might disintegrate if fully opened. He unfolded it with extreme care to reveal a list titled in bold capital letters, "Our Future Dreams." The page was divided into two columns, each headed with their names. Under Keanu, a child's hand had written, "Actor in real movies, not just school plays. Rock star with own band. Professional hockey player. Person who discovers new planets." Under Micah, writer, books and maybe movies. Teacher, but the cool kind. Motorcycle racer. Builder of the world's tallest building. At the bottom of the page, in larger letters that spanned both columns, "We will work together. Promise." Keanu stared at this artifact of childhood ambition, struck by its peculiar prescience. He had indeed become an actor in real movies, had played in bands, though hardly achieving rock star status, and Micah, according to Claire, had been both a writer and a teacher. "Did he race motorcycles too?" Keanu asked, looking up at Claire. She laughed. "No, but he owned one for years, a Triumph. He used to take me for rides on weekends, much to my mother's dismay." Keanu smiled, imagining Micah, the man in the phone photo, with the wind in his silver-streaked curls, his daughter's arms wrapped around his waist as they leaned into curves together. One more dream, at least, partially fulfilled. He continued through the box's contents, a ticket stub from a baseball game they'd attended with Keanu's mother, a small, smooth stone with a natural hole through its center that they'd found on a rare trip to Lake Ontario's shore, a brass key that Keanu recognized as belonging to the secret lockbox they'd kept hidden in the park. "What was this for?" Claire asked, noticing him lingering over the key. "We had a metal box buried under that oak tree in Greenwood Park," Keanu explained. "Our emergency supplies, a few dollars, some candy that probably attracted more ants than anything, a compass that never worked right. Important stuff for 13-year-old boys." "Is the box still there, do you think?" Claire wondered. "Probably not. We weren't exactly expert excavators. First big rain likely washed it up." Near the bottom of the shoebox, Keanu found a yellowed newspaper clipping, his first substantial review, for a performance in a regional theater production of Romeo and Juliet when he was 19. The critic had been kind, noting his natural intensity and compelling stage presence. "Hep kept everything," Keanu said softly, running his fingers over the faded newsprint. "Every step of the way." "Not just clippings," Claire said. "He saw your movies in theaters, all of them, even the ones critics panned. He'd go on opening weekend, usually to the first showing of the day when the theater was mostly empty. Said he liked to pretend it was just him, watching his friend on screen. Like a private screening. The image this conjured, Micah sitting alone in a darkened theater, watching Keanu's career unfold film by film over decades, created a tightness in his throat that made speaking difficult. He returned to the box, needing the distraction of the next artifact. At the very bottom lay a single page torn from what appeared to be a journal, the edges ragged where it had been removed from its binding. The handwriting was Micah's, but more mature than the childish script of their list. A young man's hand, rather than a boy's. At the very bottom lay a single page torn from what appeared to be a journal, the edges ragged where it had been removed from its binding. The handwriting was Micah's, but more mature than the childish script of their list. A young man's hand rather than a boy's. Keanu lifted it carefully and began to read. Saw him today, not in person but on a movie poster downtown. River's Edge, it said. I stood there staring at his face for so long that people started walking around me like I was some kind of obstruction, which, I guess, I was. He looks the same but different. Older, of course, but with the same eyes. Those eyes that always saw more than they let on. I wonder if he remembers our promise. If he still looks for me sometimes, the way I find myself scanning crowds in Toronto whenever I visit, just in case. One day he'll find her, I believe that. And when he does, maybe the circle will finally close. The entry was dated April 12, 1987, nearly 14 years after they'd parted. The final line puzzled Keanu. Her? He asked, looking up at Claire. Who was he referring to? Claire shook her head. I don't know. He never explained that part to me. There are gaps in what he shared. Pieces of his life he kept private, even from me. Keanu read the line again. One day he'll find her. The words seemed to contain a meaning just beyond his grasp, like a melody heard from too far away to identify, but still hauntingly familiar. He carefully returned each item to the shoebox, maintaining the order in which he'd found them. The process felt ceremonial somehow, an honoring of how Micah had arranged these touchstones of memory. Thank you for this, he said to Claire when the lid was back in place. It means more than I can express. There's something else, Claire said, reaching into her bag. Something I found after he died when I was cleaning out his apartment. She withdrew a small leather-bound journal. This was hidden in a drawer beneath his socks. Almost like he wasn't sure whether he wanted it found. She handed it to Keanu. Unlike the worn shoebox with its carefully preserved contents, this journal looked relatively new. Its leather still supple, its pages barely creased. I've only read parts of it, Claire admitted. It felt too private somehow. But there's an entry marked for you. She reached over and turned to a page near the middle, where a small post-it note protruded. This one. Keanu began to read the entry, dated just 3 months before Micah's death. The doctor gave me the timeline today. Months, not years, maybe less. Claire suspects, but I haven't told her outright yet. There's an art to leaving, a balance between preparation and dwelling that I'm still trying to master. I've been thinking about Keanu more than usual, about the promise. I'll always find you, he said that day under the oak tree. And in a way, he has. Through screens and magazines, through stories I've told Claire, through the ways his life has intersected with mine even without his knowing. But now I need to find him one last time. Or rather, I need Claire to find him for me. To complete the circle that began 50 years ago with 2 boys who thought friendship could conquer anything, even time. I don't want a dramatic reunion. Those belong in the movies, not real life. I just want him to know that I saw him, that I kept watching, that the promise was kept in ways neither of us could have imagined back then. And I want him to know about the script, the one we started that summer with the ridiculous alien voices and improbable plot twists. I've kept it all these years, added to it, shaped it into something that might actually work now. Our story, not of aliens and space explorers, but of 2 boys who made a promise beneath an oak tree. Maybe he'll understand. Maybe he'll even finish it someday. I've lived a quiet life, far from the spotlight that found him. But it was a good life, rich in its own ways. I have no regrets about the paths we took, even when they diverged so dramatically. We were always headed toward different stars, That much was clear even when we were kids. I just hope he remembers. Not the details, not the specifics, but the feeling. The certainty we had that summer, that some connections transcend ordinary explanation. That some promises, once made, rewrite the very fabric of who we are. Keanu's hands shook as he finished reading. The entry captured so perfectly the essence of what he'd felt since receiving Micah's letter. That their connection had somehow persisted despite time and distance. That the promise made beneath the oak tree had been kept in ways neither boy could have anticipated. "The script he mentions?" Keanu said, looking up at Claire. "Do you know where it is?" Claire nodded. "At his apartment in Toronto, along with the rest of his writings. He left instructions that you should see them if you wanted to." "I do," Keanu said without hesitation. "Very much." They sat in silence for a moment, the shoebox between them like a vessel carrying fragments of a shared past that now only Keanu remembered firsthand. The weight of being the sole remaining keeper of these memories settled on him, not as a burden, but as a responsibility, a trust. "He wasn't bitter," Claire said suddenly, as if answering a question Keanu hadn't voiced. "About your success, I mean. Some people might have been watching from afar as a childhood friend achieved such fame, but not Dad. He was genuinely proud, genuinely happy for you." "That sounds like Micah," Keanu said softly. "Even as a kid, he never had an envious bone in his body." "No," Claire agreed with a small smile, though he did occasionally joke that if he'd known you were going to be so famous, he would have asked for your autograph back when your signature was still legible. Keanu laughed, a sound of surprised delight that momentarily lightened the solemn atmosphere. He could almost hear Micah saying it, could imagine the wry twist of his mouth, the glint of humor in his eyes. "I have meetings in LA tomorrow that I can't reschedule," Keanu said after a moment, "but I'd like to go to Toronto as soon as possible, to see his apartment, to understand more about the life he built." "I'll be there through the end of the month," Claire replied, taking care of his affairs, packing up the apartment. "You're welcome anytime." Keanu carefully placed the journal on top of the shoebox. "I'll make arrangements today." As he prepared to leave, Keanu remembered the package Claire had given him at the diner, the one Micah had specified should be opened somewhere quiet. He patted his jacket pocket, confirming it was still there. "What he left for you," Claire said, noting the gesture. "He wrapped it himself, you know, when his hands were already shaking from the medications. It took him nearly an hour, but he insisted on doing it perfectly. The detail, Micah's trembling fingers carefully folding paper around a final gift, determined to get it right, affected Keanu more powerfully than he expected. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. At the door, he turned back to Claire. "Thank you," he said simply, "for keeping your promise to him, for finding me." E.O. said. "You'd be worth finding," Claire replied. He was right. As Keanu left the hotel, the shoebox and journal carefully packed in a bag Claire had provided, he felt as if he were carrying more than physical objects. He was transporting fragments of a life that had run parallel to his own for 50 years, unseen but never truly separate. 3 days later, Keanu stood outside the door of apartment 507 in a modest building in Toronto's East End. Claire had offered to meet him there, but he'd asked to visit alone first, a request she'd understood immediately. "Take your time," she'd said, handing him the key. "It's not going anywhere for a few more weeks." He unlocked the door and stepped inside, immediately enveloped by the distinct atmosphere of a space that had been lived in fully but was now suspended in time. The apartment wasn't large, a living room flowing into a small dining area and kitchen with what appeared to be 2 bedrooms and a bathroom down a short hallway, but every inch of it felt intentionally arranged, a reflection of its former occupant. The most striking feature was the books. They lined walls, filled shelves, stood in neat stacks on end tables and beside the sofa. Fiction and poetry dominated, but there were also volumes on history, philosophy, astronomy, and architecture. Many showed the soft spine creases of multiple readings, bookmarks protruding from dozens like colorful flags, marking territories of particular interest. On the wall above a modest writing desk hung a framed poster from The Matrix. Not the standard promotional image, but an artful Japanese version with minimalist design and kanji characters. Beneath it, attached with a small piece of tape, was a yellow post-it note with a single line in Micah's handwriting. "I knew he'd make it." Keanu stood before this small shrine to their connection, deeply moved by its understated nature. There was nothing obsessive or shrine-like about it, just a quiet acknowledgement, a private nod to a friendship that had shaped Micah in ways perhaps only he fully understood. The desk itself was meticulously organized, pens arranged by color, notebooks stacked by size, a small lamp positioned for optimal light. It was the workspace of someone who valued order, who found comfort in the predictable arrangement of tools. Keanu could imagine Micah sitting here in the evenings, grading papers or working on his writing, surrounded by books and the soft glow of the lamp. On a bookshelf near the desk stood several framed photographs. Most featured Claire at various ages, smiling with missing front teeth. Serious in a graduation cap and gown. Laughing on what appeared to be a hiking trail, mountains rising behind her. One showed a younger Micah with his arm around a pretty woman with Claire's curls. Her mother, presumably, before illness claimed her. And there, somewhat hidden behind the others, was a faded photograph Keanu recognized from the shoebox. The two boys in their matching Blue Jays t-shirts. Micah had displayed it among the images of the people most precious to him. This photographic evidence of a friendship 50 years past. Moving deeper into the apartment, Keanu found the kitchen to be small but functional, with well-used cooking equipment, suggesting Micah had been someone who prepared meals with care. The refrigerator door held more evidence of a life well lived. Claire's childhood artwork, postcards from various cities, a handwritten recipe for what was labeled Mom's famous chocolate cake. In the main bedroom, the presence of absence was most acute. The bed was neatly made with a dark blue comforter. The nightstand held a small stack of books with bookmarks at various depths, and a sweater was draped over the back of a chair as if its owner had just stepped out momentarily. Keanu hesitated in the doorway, feeling like an intruder in this most private space. He was about to turn away when he noticed something on the wall opposite the bed, a simple frame containing what appeared to be a handwritten poem. Moving closer, he saw it was titled, "For the Friend I Lost," and dated 1979. Keanu read it slowly, absorbing each carefully chosen word. The poem spoke of separation, of parallel lives, of watching from afar as someone dear traveled a path both different from and similar to the poet's own. The final stanza caught in Keanu's throat. "I knew he'd become something bright. I just wanted him to know I was watching. From this quiet shore, I see his light traveling across waters too wide for crossing." The words crystallized something Keanu had been feeling since receiving Micah's letter. The sense that their lives had unfolded in strange parallel, visible to each other across an unbridgeable distance. Micah had watched Keanu's journey through films and interviews, through public moments made available to anyone willing to look, but Keanu had been denied the privilege of witnessing Micah's quieter evolution, his growth into the thoughtful man Claire described, his struggles and triumphs, his development as a writer and teacher and father. The second bedroom had been converted into a writing space, with a larger desk, a comfortable reading chair, and even more books. This, clearly, was where Micah had done his serious work, the grading of student papers, the crafting of his own stories and poems. A cork bulletin board on one wall held a collage of quotes, photographs, and what appeared to be notes for writing projects. Keanu recognized several quotes from his own interviews over the years, carefully cut from magazines or printed from online sources. On the desk sat a leather portfolio, closed but with a note affixed to its cover. Keanu recognized Claire's handwriting. "Dad wanted you to have this. It's the script he mentioned." Beside it lay a stack of composition books. Micah's journals, presumably, the private record of his inner life. Keanu didn't open either the portfolio or the journals, sensing that they deserved a more deliberate approach than this initial exploration allowed. Instead, he continued his quiet inventory of the apartment, building a more complete picture of the man Micah had become. The bathroom revealed more ordinary details: a prescription bottle for blood pressure medication, a toothbrush in a simple holder, towels hung with precise alignment. The medicine cabinet contained what one would expect, plus a few items that hinted at Micah's final illness: prescription pain relievers, anti-nausea medication, supplements meant to boost a failing appetite. Returning to the living room, Keanu settled on the sofa, allowing himself to absorb the totality of Micah's space. This physical manifestation of a life lived thoughtfully, modestly, but with evident purpose. It was nothing like Keanu's own homes in Los Angeles and elsewhere, with their carefully curated art and expansive views. Yet there was a coherence to this apartment, a sense that every item had been chosen with care and kept for a reason. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew the package Claire had given him at the diner. The one Micah had specified should be opened somewhere quiet. This seemed like the perfect moment, surrounded by the evidence of Micah's life, held in the atmosphere he had created through decades of daily choices. The package was wrapped in simple blue paper, the same shade as the construction paper they had used for the Two Stars comic 5 decades earlier. Keanu unwrapped it carefully, preserving the paper out of respect for the effort Micah had made with trembling hands. Inside was a small wooden box, handcrafted with obvious care. Its lid bore a carved image of an oak tree, its branches spreading across the polished surface. Keanu ran his fingers over the carving, feeling the ridges and valleys of the wood grain enhanced by the artisan's skill. When he opened the box, he found a single item nestled on a bed of soft cloth: an antique brass key. Not the small, tarnished key from their childhood lockbox, but a larger, more ornate one that might open an old door or cabinet. Attached to it was a small tag with 4 words in Micah's handwriting: "For when you're ready." Keanu turned the key over in his palm, its weight substantial, its purpose mysterious. There was no indication of what it might open or where that lock might be found. The cryptic message offered no clarification, only deepened the enigma. He placed the key back in its wooden nest and closed the box, setting it on the coffee table before him. There, in Micah's quiet apartment, surrounded by the books and photographs and small treasures that had composed his daily life, Keanu felt the full weight of what had been lost. Not just the boy he had known, but the man he had never had the chance to know. "I didn't forget you, Micah," he whispered to the empty room. "I just never knew where to look." The words hung in the still air, an echo of absence, a bridge across 50 years of separation. In the silence that followed, Keanu felt something shift. Not closure, which seemed too neat and final for what he was experiencing, but a opening of possibility. A new chapter in a story he had thought long finished. He would stay a while longer, sitting quietly in Micah's space, absorbing what remained of his presence. And then he would begin the work of understanding: the script, the journals, the key, the gifts Micah had left behind, not as endings, but as invitations to continue. The Toronto Child Welfare Records Office occupied the 3rd floor of a nondescript government building downtown. The waiting area featured the standard institutional elements: vinyl chairs in a faded blue, fluorescent lighting that cast everyone in an unflattering pallor, potted plants that appeared to be surviving rather than thriving. A sign on the wall read, "Supporting Families Since 1947, above a stock photo of smiling children. Keanu sat with his back to the wall, baseball cap pulled low, grateful that the bored-looking receptionist hadn't recognized him when he'd stated his business 20 minutes earlier. The last thing he wanted was to create a stir while pursuing something so personal. "Mr. Reeves?" A middle-aged woman with practical gray hair and sensible shoes emerged from a door behind the reception desk. "I'm Susan Gallo. I'll be assisting you today." She led him through a maze of cubicles to a small conference room, furnished with a wooden table and 4 chairs. The walls were bare save for a framed organizational chart and a poster outlining confidentiality guidelines. "I've pulled the records you requested," Susan said, placing a manila folder on the table. "As I mentioned on the phone, our files from the 1970s aren't completely digitized, so this is what we have in hard copy. And as the legal representative for Mr. Dawson's estate, Ms. Claire Dawson has provided the necessary authorization for their release to you." "Thank you," Keanu said, eyeing the folder with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. "I appreciate your help." "I'll give you some privacy," Susan said, moving toward the door. "Just ring the bell on the table when you're finished, and I'll come back to secure the files." Once alone, Keanu took a deep breath and opened the folder. Inside lay the paper trail of Micah's journey through the foster care system, a bureaucratic accounting of a child's displacement, rendered in the dispassionate language of official reports. The first document was Micah's initial intake form, created after his parents' deaths in 1968. The details were sparse but affecting in their starkness. Subject is male, 8 years old, no known relatives available for placement. Parents deceased in MVA, motor vehicle accident, on April 17, 68. Subject was not in vehicle. Subject is physically healthy but exhibiting signs of emotional trauma, selective mutism, nightmares, bedwetting. Placement in emergency foster care recommended. Attached was a school photo of Micah at 8 small for his age, with the same wild curls Keanu remembered, but eyes that looked too old for his face. The image of this bereft child, suddenly orphaned and thrust into an impersonal system, created a tightness in Keanu's chest. He continued through the chronological record of Micah's placements. The list was longer than he'd expected. 19681-969. The Marshalls, emergency placement 7 months. 19691-970. The Hendersons, 10 months. 1970197. 1 Glenwood Group Home, 14 months. 1971973. The Larsons, 20 months. This was where Micah had been living when he and Keanu became friends. 19731-974. The Pelletiers, 8 months, Montreal. 1975 Bridgeview Group Home, 11 months, Ottawa. 19751-977. The Connors, 18 months, Windsor. 1977-1978. The Jacksons, 5 months, Toronto. 19781-979 Westview Group Home, until aging out at 18. Each transfer included a brief explanation. Foster parents requested removal due to subject's increasing behavioral issues. Placement terminated when foster family relocated for employment. Subject ran away repeatedly. More structured environment recommended. The clinical language masked what must have been deeply painful transitions for a child already traumatized by loss. Progress reports appeared at regular intervals, documenting Micah's academic performance, generally good, with particular strengths in English and history. Social adjustment, increasingly problematic as he entered adolescence, and psychological evaluations, noting trust issues, difficulty forming attachments, and pronounced fear of abandonment. A report from 1976, when Micah would have been 16, caught Keanu's attention. A social worker had noted, subject continues to express interest in writing and literature. Won regional youth poetry contest with piece titled Invisible Boy. Demonstrates significant talent, but lacks consistent encouragement from current placement family. Recommended for advanced English classes despite behavioral concerns. Attached was a photocopy of the poem that had won recognition. Keanu read it slowly, hearing echoes of the adult writer Micah would become in the teenager's careful arrangement of words. The poem spoke of a boy who could see others but remained unseen himself, who occupied space but left no impression, who shouted into voids that never returned his voice. The final line struck with particular force. You promised to find me, but how can you find what has learned to disappear? Keanu sat back, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. The line could have been coincidence, a universal sentiment rather than a specific reference, but the timing of the poem, written 3 years after their separation, suggested Micah had been addressing him directly, across the distance between them. The file continued through Micah's final years in the system, documenting his eventual placement in a transitional housing program after aging out at 18. Notes indicated he had completed high school and received a partial scholarship to a community college, where he studied English and education while working part-time jobs to support himself. The final entry, dated 1980, simply stated, "Case closed. Subject has successfully transitioned to independent living." So clinical, so inadequate to capture the reality of a young man left entirely to his own devices after a decade of institutional care and impermanent homes. Keanu closed the folder, feeling both enlightened and frustrated by its contents. The records told him where Micah had been, but revealed little about who he had become during those formative years. He rang the bell as instructed, and Susan returned promptly. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked as she collected the folder. "Partially," Keanu replied. "The records mention a social worker named Mrs. Bergman who worked with Micah in his later teens. Would you happen to know if she's still in the area?" Susan considered this. "Eleanor Bergman? She retired about 15 years ago, but I believe she still lives in Toronto. She used to volunteer here occasionally after retirement." She hesitated, then added, "I could try to contact her for you if you'd like. No promises, but she might be willing to speak with you, especially if it's about Micah. She always had a soft spot for her special cases, as she called them." "I'd appreciate that very much," Keanu said. 2 days later, Keanu found himself sitting in a small cafe near High Park, waiting to meet the woman who had known Micah during some of his most difficult years. He'd chosen a table in the back corner, away from windows and casual observation. Eleanor Bergman arrived precisely on time, scanning the cafe with the alert gaze of someone accustomed to assessing situations quickly. She was perhaps in her mid-70s, with short silver hair and rimless glasses, dressed in practical layers against the autumn chill. When she spotted Keanu, she approached with direct purpose, extending her hand before she'd fully reached the table. "Mr. Reeves," she said, her grip firm despite her age. "Eleanor Bergman. Susan said you're interested in Micah Dawson." "Please, call me Keanu," he replied, standing to greet her. "And yes, I'm trying to learn more about his life after we lost touch. We were close friends as children." Eleanor settled into the chair opposite him, studying his face with professional assessment. "I remember. He mentioned you occasionally, though it clearly pained him to do so." The bluntness of her statement caught Keanu off guard. Pained him? Loss was a defining feature of Micah's life, Eleanor explained, accepting the cup of tea the waiter delivered. His parents, his stability, his sense of belonging, all stripped away before he had the emotional tools to process such trauma. And then you. She held up a hand as if anticipating his defense. "I'm not suggesting you abandon him willfully. You were children, subject to adults' decisions. But in Micah's experience, you were one more person who disappeared when he had allowed himself to care." The truth of this settled heavily on Keanu. He had tried to find Micah immediately after his disappearance, had asked teachers, called the few outdated numbers he had, even convinced his mother to drive him past the Larson's house, only to find a different family living there. But he had been 13, with limited resources and reach. Eventually, the search had given way to the forward momentum of his own life. "I'd like to understand who he became," Keanu said after a moment. "The files tell me where he was, but not who he was during those years." Eleanor nodded, seeming to approve of the question. "Micah was complicated, brilliant but guarded, creative but practical, always observing, always slightly removed, as if he couldn't quite trust that any situation was permanent." She sipped her tea thoughtfully. "But there was a spark in him that never went out, despite everything. a capacity for insight and empathy that I found remarkable given his circumstances. The records mentioned he won a poetry contest. Common of many small triumphs, Eleanor confirmed. He had a gift with words. His English teachers recognized it, encouraged it, and when he was 17, he started volunteering at a youth center where I ran support groups. He connected especially well with the younger boys, perhaps because he recognized himself in them. She reached into her bag and withdrew a folder of her own. I kept some of his work. Against regulation, strictly speaking, but I couldn't bear to see it disappear into the system. She slid a paper across the table. This is the one that always stayed with me. He wrote it at 19, just before aging out. The poem was titled simply, "For the Friend I Lost," the same one Keanu had seen framed on Micah's bedroom wall. "He never stopped looking for you," Eleanor said quietly, in his own way. After his meeting with Eleanor Bergman, Keanu found himself drawn back to Greenwood Park, to the oak tree that had witnessed their childhood promise. He wasn't sure what he expected to find there. The tree couldn't speak, couldn't fill in the gaps of understanding that still remained, despite his growing knowledge of Micah's life. The park had changed over 5 decades. Playground equipment modernized, pathways repaved, new landscaping added. But the oak tree remained, now towering even larger than in his memory, its massive trunk bearing the scars and growth of additional years. Keanu approached it slowly, feeling a strange reverence, as if entering a sacred space. He circled the trunk, searching for the initials they had carved that summer day. Logic suggested they would be long gone, grown over by new bark or erased by park maintenance, but some irrational part of him hoped for this small connection to remain. And there they were. KR plus MD, now stretched and distorted by the tree's growth, but still legible, still present. Keanu traced the letters with his fingertips, feeling the rough edges their knife had made 5 decades earlier. The physical evidence of their pact had endured, outlasting the boys who had created it. He settled on the ground beneath the spreading branches, his back against the trunk, mirroring the position they had taken that day when promises had seemed simple to make and impossible to break. The folded paper in his pocket, Micah's poem that Eleanor had given him, seemed to burn with potential energy, like a message in a bottle that had finally reached its intended shore. Keanu withdrew the poem and unfolded it carefully. The paper was worn at the creases, the typewritten text faded but still clear. He began to read aloud, his voice low but clear in the quiet corner of the park. "For the friend I lost. I look for you in crowds sometimes, in subway cars and checkout lines, in faces passing on the street, in every stranger that I meet. I wonder if you look for me, or if I've faded from memory, like summer days that slip away, when autumn winds begin to play. They moved me east, then west, then north, in system shuffle back and forth, while you stayed rooted to the spot where promises were made, then not. I don't blame you. How could you know? The forwarding address to show where they had sent the boy whose hand once grasped with yours in friendship's band. I see you now in moving frames, in posters bearing your name, and something in me swells with pride to watch you shine so bright, so wide. I knew you would, even back then, before your face grew known to men. I saw the light you carried deep, the talent others missed. Asleep, I never rode. Pride kept me still, or fear, perhaps, against my will. What would I say after the years had carved their channels deep with tears? So here I stand on distant shore, the boy you knew exists no more. Yet still inside, that child remains who hears your promise through the rains. I knew he'd become something bright. I just wanted him to know I was watching. From this quiet shore, I see his light, traveling across waters too wide for crossing." Keanu's voice broke on the final stanza. He sat silently for several minutes, the poem in his hands, the oak tree solid against his back. Around him, the park continued its ordinary rhythms. Joggers on paths, children on swings, dogs chasing balls across open spaces. Life moving forward while he sat suspended between past and present. The poem revealed so much that had been hidden from him. Micah's continued awareness of him even as their lives diverged. His pride in Keanu's success, his reluctance to reach out across the growing divide between them. But most striking was the absence of bitterness, the generosity of spirit that allowed Micah to celebrate Keanu's rising star without resentment for his own quieter path. Keanu read the poem again, this time silently, absorbing nuances missed in the first reading. The line about promises made, then not, struck him particularly, an acknowledgement that their childhood vow had been broken not through malice, but through circumstances beyond their control. Yet the final stanza suggested something else, that Micah had continued to hold space for that promise, to believe in it, despite all evidence that it had been forgotten. He folded the poem and placed it back in his pocket, then pulled out his phone. The conversation with Claire was brief but decisive. When he ended the call, Keanu remained beneath the oak tree, watching as afternoon shadows lengthened across the park. He felt a clarity emerging from the complexity of emotions the poem had stirred, not a resolution exactly, but a direction forward. The oak tree had witnessed their promise 50 years ago. Now it witnessed something else. A man reconnecting with a part of himself long submerged beneath the layers of his public persona. A silent recommitment to a friendship that could no longer be reciprocated in the ordinary way, but might still find expression. Hours passed as Keanu sat beneath the tree, lost in thought and memory. The park gradually emptied as evening approached, the autumn air growing chillier with the setting sun. Eventually he rose, his decision made. He couldn't reclaim the lost decades, he couldn't rewrite their separate histories, but he could honor what had been and what remained, the bond between two boys that had somehow persisted through separation and silence, maintained by one even when forgotten by the other. He placed his palm against the carved initials one last time, then walked back through the darkening park toward the street where his rental car waited. At his hotel, he made a series of calls to his agent in Los Angeles, to Claire in her Toronto apartment, to Eleanor Bergman with a specific request. With each conversation, the shape of his intention became clearer, more defined. That night, in the quiet of his hotel room, Keanu called Claire. "I read the poem," he said when she answered. "The one Eleanor Bergman gave me. It changed everything." "How so?" Claire asked, her voice soft through the connection. "I've been thinking about your father all wrong," Keanu explained. "I've been feeling guilty, as if I'd failed him by not finding him sooner. But the poem, he wasn't waiting to be found, not really. He was watching. He was witnessing my journey from afar. There's a kind of peace in that realization." "That sounds like Dad," Claire said. "He never expected people to solve his problems or rescue him. He just wanted to be seen, to matter to someone." "Mattered," Keanu said firmly. "He always mattered." There was a pause, and Keanu could hear Claire taking a steadying breath. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Something I've wondered since I was old enough to understand who you were." "Of course. If you had known where he was, if you had somehow found him 20 or 30 years ago, what would you have done?" The question hung between them, impossible to answer with complete honesty because it required imagining an alternative path through decades already traveled. Yet Keanu knew what Claire needed to hear. Not reassurance, but truth. "I would have reached out," he said after a moment, "but I don't know if I would have been able to bridge the gap that had formed between us. Fame changes how people see you, how they relate to you. The boy he knew disappeared into the public figure I became. I'm not sure we could have found our way back to that simple friendship." "Thank you for being honest," Claire replied. "I think that's why he never tried to contact you directly, even when he could have. He didn't want to put you in an awkward position or himself. He preferred the relationship he'd created in his mind, the one where he could watch your journey without complicating it with his presence. The insight struck Keanu as both sad and profound. Micah standing at a distance, bearing witness to his friend's life without demanding recognition or reciprocity. There was a purity to that kind of attention, a generosity that transcended ordinary friendship. "I'd like to do something," Keanu said, the idea that had been forming since reading the poem now crystallizing into words. Something to honor that connection, something that acknowledges what he gave me even without my knowing it. "What did you have in mind?" Claire asked. "I'm not entirely sure yet, but it starts with that script he mentioned in his journal, the one we began as kids that he continued to work on. I'd like to read it, to understand his vision." "It's at the apartment," Claire confirmed. "In the leather portfolio I showed you. Would you mind if I came by tomorrow to get it?" "Not at all. I'll be there all day." After they said goodnight, Keanu sat by the window of his hotel room, looking out at the Toronto skyline. The city had changed dramatically since his childhood. Taller, glossier, more cosmopolitan, but beneath the modern exterior, the bones of the place he had known remained. Like Micah himself, transformed by time, yet fundamentally unchanged in his essence. He pulled out his phone again and made another call, this one to his agent in Los Angeles. "Alan, it's Keanu. I need to clear my schedule for the next month. Everything that can be moved, move it." "A month?" Alan's voice registered professional concern. "Keanu, you're in pre-production on 2 projects. We can maybe buy you a week, 10 days max." "This is important, Alan. Family important." The phrase gave Alan pause. In their 15 years of working together, Keanu had rarely invoked personal matters as a reason to adjust professional commitments. "I'll see what I can do," Alan relented. "But I'll need more to tell people than family important. Tell them I'm developing a special project, something personal." Keanu looked out at the city lights, each one representing lives being lived in private moments just like this one. "Tell them it's about keeping a promise." The next morning, Keanu returned to Micah's apartment, where Claire was already waiting. She had the leather portfolio ready, along with a cardboard box containing other materials she thought might be relevant. Additional notebooks, photographs, even a flash drive with digital files from Micah's computer. "Hell worked on it for years," she explained as she handed over the portfolio. "Started with that childhood script you two created, but it evolved into something much more complex. Something about friendship and parallel lives, and the ways people influence each other, even when separated." Keanu accepted the portfolio with a sense of ceremonial significance, understanding that it contained not just a screenplay, but a vision of connection that had sustained Micah through decades of separation. "There's something else I want to tell you," Claire said as they sat at Micah's small dining table. "Something Dad asked me to share, only if I thought you were genuinely interested in the script, not just being polite about it." "I'm interested," Keanu assured her. "Very much so." Claire nodded, seeming to make a final decision. "He didn't just write it as a creative exercise or a way to process the past. He wrote it for you, for both of you. He had this idea that somehow, someday, you might actually make it together." "That sounds crazy, I know." "It doesn't sound crazy at all," Keanu interrupted gently. "It sounds like the natural conclusion to the promise we made. We'll work together someday. That was on our list of dreams, the one in the shoebox." Uwe nodded. "Never expected it to happen," Claire continued. "He was realistic about the odds, but he worked on that script as if it might, pouring everything he understood about storytelling, about human connection, about you, into its pages." Keanu felt the weight of this revelation settle around him, not as a burden but as a responsibility, an opportunity to honor what Micah had created in hope rather than expectation. "I'll read it today," he promised. "Every word." After Claire left, Keanu settled into Micah's reading chair, the leather portfolio open in his lap. The title page read simply, "The Two Stars," based on a story by Keanu Reeves and Micah Dawson. As he began to read, the apartment around him seemed to fade, replaced by the world Micah had created. A world where two boyhood friends were separated by circumstances beyond their control, their lives unfolding in parallel but wildly different trajectories. One achieved fame and public acclaim, the other built a quieter life rich in different ways. Yet through it all, an invisible thread connected them, influencing choices and perspectives in ways neither fully recognized. It wasn't their actual story. Micah had transformed their simple childhood bond into something more universal, more symbolic. But the emotional truth at its core was unmistakable. The power of being truly seen by another person. The enduring impact of promises made in innocence. The ways in which we carry those who have mattered to us even when physically absent from our lives. Hours passed as Keanu read, occasionally making notes in the margins or pausing to absorb a particularly resonant passage. The script wasn't perfect. It needed structural refinement, character development in places, a stronger third act, but its heart was undeniable. It pulsed with authenticity and a depth of feeling that couldn't be manufactured. When he finally reached the last page, the light outside had shifted to late afternoon gold. Keanu sat quietly for several minutes, the completed script in his hands, allowing its impact to settle within him. Then he pulled out his phone and called Claire again. "I've read it," he said when she answered. "It's remarkable." "You really think so?" Her voice held cautious hope. "It's not just, sentimental or wishful thinking? It's real," Keanu assured her. "Your father was genuinely talented. This script has flaws, but its heart is true. And I think I know what I want to do now." "What's that?" "I want to finish what we started," Keanu said simply. "I want to make this film." The words, once spoken, crystallized his intention. He couldn't reclaim the lost years or rewrite their separate journeys. But he could honor the bond that had persisted despite distance and silence, the connection that Micah had maintained through his private witness of Keanu's public life. "Never stopped keeping me close," Keanu said, echoing the realization that had been growing since he first received Micah's letter. "Now, I'll do the same for you, for both of you." In the silence that followed, Keanu could almost feel the presence of the boy who had once been his closest friend, the boy who had grown into a man who wrote stories and shaped young minds and raised a daughter alone, all while keeping an invisible thread connected to a promise made beneath an oak tree 50 years before. The script in his hands represented that connection made tangible. A bridge between what was lost and what remained, between memory and possibility, between a promise broken by circumstance and one that might still, in some transformed way, be kept. The Toronto boutique hotel where Keanu had taken residence became his unofficial workspace over the next 2 weeks. He'd requested a suite with a separate living area, and that space quickly transformed into a writer's room. Script pages spread across the coffee table, notes taped to walls, books on screenwriting and structure stacked on every available surface. Room service staff had grown accustomed to delivering coffee at odd hours and finding the occupant deep in concentration, sometimes still wearing the previous day's clothes. Keanu had extended his stay in Toronto indefinitely, rearranging work commitments and postponing pre-production meetings through a series of calls that his agent had described as career-challenging but not career-ending. The temporary disruption to his professional schedule felt insignificant compared to the task before him, honoring Micah's vision while bringing his own voice to their shared story. On this particular afternoon, he sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by script pages, a red pen in hand, when a knock came at the door. He glanced at his watch, realizing it was already past 5, the time Claire had said she'd stop by after finishing work at the university library where she'd taken a temporary position. "It's open," he called, setting aside his pen and gathering scattered pages into a more organized pile. Claire entered, carrying a bag of takeout food and a bemused expression. "You know, most celebrities are a bit more cautious about who they let into their hotel rooms," she remarked, closing the door behind her. "I'm expecting you," Keanu replied with a smile. And I don't think paparazzi are a major concern in this scenario. Claire set the food on the small dining table and surveyed the controlled chaos of the living space. How's it coming? Progress, Keanu said, rising from the floor with a slight grimace as his knees protested. Your father created a solid foundation. I'm trying to honor that while addressing the structural issues. He crossed to the table and began unpacking the food containers of Thai curry, noodles, and spring rolls from a local restaurant they'd discovered shared a mutual appreciation for. The ritual had become part of their collaboration over the past week, as Claire had gradually shifted from simply providing insight into her father's work to becoming an active participant in the revision process. I spoke with Professor Martinez today, Claire said as they settled at the table. He agreed to let me access Dad's work computer at the school. There might be additional drafts or notes there that could help. That would be great, Keanu replied, reaching for the container of green curry. I'm particularly struggling with the third act. It feels like Micah was working toward something specific, but I can't quite grasp what it was. He was always secretive about endings, Claire said, a fond smile crossing her face. Used to drive me crazy when I was little. He'd read me stories but make me wait until the next night for the conclusion. Said anticipation was part of the experience. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, both tired from their respective days of work. The easy rhythm they'd established still surprised Keanu, this natural rapport with someone who had been a stranger just weeks ago. Yet perhaps it wasn't so surprising. Claire was Micah's daughter, carrying his perspectives, his humor, his way of observing the world with quiet attention. I've been thinking, Claire said eventually, setting down her fork, about the key. Keanu's hand paused halfway to his mouth. The brass key from the carved box had remained a mystery, its purpose and corresponding lock still unknown. What about it? Dad had a safety deposit box at Toronto Dominion Bank downtown. I found the paperwork when sorting his financial documents, but I haven't had time to check it out yet. The key doesn't look like a typical safety deposit key, but it's worth investigating, Keanu agreed. First thing tomorrow? Claire nodded, then reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. Before I forget, I brought you this. Some of Dad's students put together video tributes after his death. Former students, too, from years back. I thought they might help you understand how he was as a teacher, the impact he had. The gesture touched Keanu deeply, this sharing of yet another dimension of Micah's life, another facet of the man he had become. Thank you. I'd like to see those. After dinner, they returned to the script work. Keanu had taped a large story outline to one wall, color-coded to show original elements from Micah's draft and new additions he was proposing. Claire settled on the couch with her laptop, reviewing digital files of her father's notes, while Keanu paced, talking through a particularly challenging scene transition. The problem is maintaining the parallel structure while still creating momentum, he explained, gesturing toward the outline. In Micah's draft, we keep cutting between the two characters' lives in a way that's thematically rich but dramatically static. There's no rising action. Claire considered this, her expression thoughtful. What if it's not strictly parallel? What if their lives occasionally intersect, even if they don't realize it? Like they keep just missing each other? Keanu asked, intrigued by the suggestion. Something like that. Near misses, maybe, or moments when one unknowingly influences the other's path. She turned her laptop toward him, displaying a document she'd been reviewing. Look at this note from Dad's files. Consider the invisible threads that connect us across time and distance. How might two people touch each other's lives without direct contact? The concept resonated immediately. That's it, Keanu said, already moving to the outline to make notes. Not parallel lines that never meet, but converging paths that almost connect, over and over, building tension toward an eventual intersection. The creative breakthrough energized them both. For the next several hours, they reworked the story structure, reimagining scenes to incorporate this new dynamic. Claire contributed insights from her literature background, while Keanu drew on his decades of experience in film to address pacing and visual storytelling. Well past midnight, they finally paused, both mentally exhausted but satisfied with the progress made. The script was taking shape in a new way, still fundamentally Micah's vision, but enhanced by their combined perspectives. "He would have loved this," Claire said quietly, looking at the transformed outline. "Working together like this? Building on his ideas?" "I think he knew it would happen this way," Keanu replied. "Maybe not the specifics, but the general shape of it. The three of us completing what he and I started." "The three of us," Claire repeated, seeming surprised by the inclusion. "Absolutely. This is becoming as much your project as it is mine or your father's." Keanu gestured to the notes and suggestions Claire had contributed throughout the evening. "You have good instincts for story, for emotional truth. Micah would be proud." Claire ducked her head, but not before Keanu caught the sheen of tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. The following weeks followed a similar pattern. Days spent investigating Micah's life and work, evenings dedicated to refining the script. The safety deposit box had yielded financial documents and a sealed letter addressed to Claire, but nothing related to the mysterious brass key, which remained an unsolved puzzle. They visited Micah's former school, where colleagues shared stories of his dedication to students, his quiet humor, his ability to connect with troubled teens that other teachers had given up on. Former students spoke of how he had recognized potential in them they hadn't seen themselves, how his belief had altered their trajectories in subtle but significant ways. The script evolved accordingly, incorporating these new understandings of who Micah had been. In collaborative sessions that often ran late into the night, Keanu and Claire reshaped the narrative, maintaining its essential heart while strengthening its structure and deepening its characters. One evening, as they worked through a pivotal scene, Keanu paused in the middle of reading a dialogue passage aloud. "This line," he said, pointing to a character's impassioned speech about recognition and witness. "This is pure Micah." Claire leaned over to see the line in question. "Yes," she confirmed. "He used to say something very similar to his students. To be truly seen by another person is the greatest gift we can receive." Keanu sat back, struck anew by the parallels between the fictional story they were crafting and the real one they were living. Micah had seen him as a child with potential, as a young actor finding his way, as an established star navigating fame. Had seen him and witnessed his journey without demanding acknowledgement or reciprocity. Now, in crafting this script from the foundation Micah had built, Keanu was returning that gift, seeing Micah in all his complexity, witnessing the life he had lived, acknowledging the invisible thread that had connected them across 50 years of separation. "I think we're ready," Keanu said finally, gathering the scattered script pages into a neat stack. "Ready to take this to the next level?" "What's the next level?" Claire asked, though something in her expression suggested she already knew. "Making it real," Keanu replied simply. "Turning the script from words on paper to something people can see and feel, fulfilling the promise." The script that had begun as the two stars, created by two boys with nothing but imagination and friendship, had evolved into something far more complex, a meditation on connection and witness, on promises kept in unexpected ways, on the lasting impact of being truly seen by another person. Like the oak tree that had grown from a slender sapling to a towering presence in Greenwood Park, their simple story had developed depth and reach beyond what either could have envisioned. And Keanu, who had spent decades being witnessed by countless anonymous eyes, found profound meaning in this opportunity to witness in return, to see and acknowledge the life of the friend he had lost and found again too late. 4 months later, a light snow dusted the sidewalks outside the Bloor Street Cinema, a historic theater in Toronto's Annex neighborhood. The marquee displayed no title, just a simple announcement: private screening, 7 p.m. Despite the minimal publicity, a small crowd had gathered near the entrance, drawn by rumors of a special event and the occasional glimpse of recognizable faces entering the building. Inside, the lobby hummed with quiet conversation as the invited guests mingled before the screening. The atmosphere was purposefully intimate. No red carpet, No step-and-repeat backdrop for photos. No media passes or press junket. Instead, the space held an eclectic mix of people connected by their relationship to either Micah or the project itself, former students and colleagues from his teaching career, Eleanor Bergman and other social workers who had known him during his youth, actors and crew members who had worked on the film, and a small number of Keanu's industry connections who had helped bring the project to fruition on an accelerated timeline. Near the refreshment table, Claire stood in quiet conversation with her mother's sister, who had flown in from Vancouver for the occasion. She wore a simple black dress with a pendant Keanu recognized, a small brass key on a silver chain, identical to the one from the wooden box. The mystery of its matching lock remained unsolved, but Claire had adopted it as a talisman, a physical connection to her father. Keanu moved through the gathering with deliberate calm, greeting guests individually, thanking them for coming. He had opted for understated elegance, dark suit, no tie, his hair pulled back neatly. The production had been completed in remarkable time, a testament to the dedication of everyone involved and the strange alchemy that sometimes occurs when a project carries emotional significance beyond its commercial potential. At precisely 7 o'clock, the lobby lights dimmed briefly, signaling it was time to move into the theater. The guests filed into the main screening room, where the original Art Deco fixtures had been preserved, casting a warm glow over vintage seating. Keanu and Claire took their places in the center of the room, surrounded by those who had known and loved Micah in various capacities throughout his life. When everyone was seated, Keanu moved to the front of the theater. The murmur of conversation faded as he turned to face the audience, his expression serious but warm. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice carrying easily in the hushed space. "This isn't a conventional film premiere. There are no critics here to offer reviews, no distributors assessing commercial potential. This is something more personal, a promise kept, a circle completed." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Many of you knew Micah Dawson as a teacher, a colleague, a friend, a father. I knew him as a boy with wild curls and wilder imagination who once helped me create a story about two space explorers discovering a new world." Keanu gestured to the screen behind him. That story, begun 50 years ago by two kids with nothing but time and friendship, has evolved into what you're about to see. The audience listened with rapt attention as he continued. "This film, The Two Stars, isn't exactly our childhood story. Micah transformed our simple beginning into something deeper, more universal, but at its heart remains the truth we discovered under an oak tree in Greenwood Park, that being truly seen by another person changes us in ways we might not fully understand until decades later." Keanu's gaze found Claire in the audience, and he smiled slightly. "This project wouldn't exist without Claire Dawson, who not only found me, as her father asked, but became an essential creative partner in completing what Micah began. While I'm listed as the director, this film belongs to the three of us, to a friendship that began in 1973, and somehow, against all odds, found its conclusion in 2023. He stepped back, ready to conclude. This is a story written by two boys with nothing but imagination, and a promise that was never broken. I hope it speaks to you in some small way." With that, Keanu returned to his seat beside Claire as the lights dimmed fully and the screen illuminated. The film began without credits, opening instead on a simple image. An ancient oak tree in a city park, its branches spreading against a summer sky. Two boys on bicycles entered the frame, their carefree movements capturing the particular freedom of childhood before adult concerns take hold. For the next 90 minutes, the audience was transported into the world Micah had envisioned and Keanu had helped realize. A story of parallel lives, occasionally intersecting in ways neither character fully recognized, of influence extending across distance and time, of promises kept in unexpected forms. The film was deliberately small in scope, but ambitious in emotional reach, focusing on human connection rather than dramatic spectacle. Throughout the screening, Keanu was acutely aware of the reactions around him. The collective intake of breath at pivotal moments, the occasional soft laughter at recognizable human foibles, the palpable stillness during scenes of particular poignancy. Beside him, Claire alternated between watching the screen and watching the audience, her expression a mixture of wonder and grief. When the final scene faded to black, the two main characters finally meeting after decades of near misses, silhouetted against the same oak tree where their story began, the theater remained silent for several heartbeats. Then, as simple credits began to roll, listing Micah Dawson as creator and co-writer, the audience rose in a standing ovation that seemed to emerge from a place deeper than conventional appreciation. In the front row, Eleanor Bergman wiped tears from her eyes while applauding. Near the back, a group of former students embraced, their faces reflecting recognition of the teacher who had seen something in each of them worth nurturing. And throughout the theater, people who had known different versions of Micah, as child, as colleague, as mentor, as friend, found themselves connected through this final expression of his creative vision. The applause continued as Keanu and Claire made their way back to the front of the theater. When the audience finally quieted, Claire stepped forward, her voice steady despite the emotion visible on her face. "My father once told me that stories don't really end. They just change narrators," she said. "I think he understood something essential about how we carry each other forward through memory and influence. How connections persist, even when physical presence ends." She fingered the key pendant at her throat. "Dad never expected this film to exist. He wrote the script as an act of private creativity, a way of processing a friendship that had meant everything to him as a child, and continued to shape him even in absence. That it now exists as something tangible, something others can experience." She paused, gathering herself. "Well, I think it would leave him speechless, which those who knew him can appreciate was nearly impossible." A gentle ripple of knowing laughter spread through the audience. "On behalf of my father," Claire continued, "thank you for being here tonight, for witnessing this final chapter of a story that began 50 years ago between two boys who believed friendship could transcend anything, even time itself." As the audience rose once more in applause, Keanu stood slightly behind Claire, allowing her this moment of recognition and closure. The film they had created together wasn't perfect. No creative work ever is, but it was authentic in a way that commercial considerations rarely allow. It had emerged from genuine emotion, from the mysterious alchemy of memory and imagination, from the human need to be witnessed and remembered. After the screening, the guests lingered in the lobby, sharing memories of Micah and impressions of the film. Several former colleagues approached Keanu to thank him, each offering some small insight into the man Micah had become. His dedication to students, others had dismissed, his quiet humor in faculty meetings, his habit of leaving anonymous notes of encouragement for those going through difficult times. "You captured him," one elderly English teacher said, her eyes bright with emotion. Not literally, but essentially. His belief that being seen, truly seen, was the greatest gift one person could offer another. As the evening wound down, Claire found Keanu near the theater exit. "They loved it," she said softly. "He would have loved it too." "Not for the recognition," Keanu replied, understanding Micah in a way that still surprised him, "but for the connection, for the complete circle." Outside, snow continued to fall gently on the Toronto streets, covering the city in a quiet blanket of white. Inside the Bloor Cinema, a promise made beneath an oak tree 50 years earlier had found its fulfillment in a form neither boy could have imagined. Through a film that honored not what had been lost, but what had endured despite separation and silence. Spring arrived in Toronto with characteristic hesitation. Warm days interspersed with lingering chill, crocuses pushing through partially frozen ground, trees budding cautiously as if wary of winter's potential return. 6 months had passed since Keanu had received Micah's letter, 5 since the private screening that had brought together the disparate threads of a life observed from afar. On this particular morning, Keanu stood in Greenwood Park beneath the oak tree that had witnessed their childhood promise. Beside him, Claire studied the installation that maintenance workers were completing, a simple wooden bench positioned to offer a view of both the tree and the playground beyond. Do you think he would approve? Keanu asked, watching as the workers secured the bench to its concrete footings. The bench? Absolutely, Claire replied. The plaque? He'd be mortified by the attention, she smiled slightly, which is exactly why it's perfect. The workers finished their task and respectfully withdrew, leaving Keanu and Claire alone with the newly installed bench. Its design was deliberately timeless. Solid oak, smoothly contoured for comfort, with arms that curved organically from the main structure. Nothing flashy or ostentatious, much like the man it honored. Claire approached first, running her hand along the polished wood, then settling onto the seat as if testing its welcome. It feels right, she said, patting the space beside her in invitation. Keanu joined her, and together they contemplated the bronze plaque affixed to the bench's center. It read simply, Micah Dawson, friend, dreamer, writer, kept the light on. Beneath it, Keanu Reeves, still keeping the promise. The paired inscriptions had been carefully considered, each word weighed for its resonance. They spoke to those who knew the story while offering something meaningful to those who didn't, an acknowledgement of connection that transcended ordinary explanation. It's strange, Claire said after a moment. I've spent my whole life knowing Dad's stories about you, about this tree, about the promise, but sitting here now makes it real in a way it never was before. Keanu nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. For him, too, the physical presence of the bench, the tangible commemoration of what had once existed only in memory, created a kind of reality that transcended mere recollection. The film's doing well, he said, shifting topics slightly. After the private screening, several distributors had expressed interest in the two stars, recognizing its modest commercial potential but significant critical appeal. They had chosen a smaller, independent company known for thoughtful promotion of character-driven stories. I saw the reviews, Claire agreed. Dad would be pretending to be annoyed by the attention while secretly reading every word. This drew a smile from Keanu, who had come to know Micah well enough through Claire's stories to recognize the accuracy of this assessment. The university acceptance came through? Claire nodded, her expression brightening. Full scholarship to the MFA program at NYU. I start in September. Be incredibly proud, Keanu said, genuinely pleased for her. Claire had decided to pursue a graduate degree in creative writing, inspired in part by working on her father's script. Are you nervous about the move? Terrified, she admitted with a small laugh. But Dad always said the best stories happen just beyond your comfort zone. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as the park gradually filled with morning visitors. Mothers with strollers navigating still damp pathways, elderly people walking dogs at a measured pace, children racing toward the playground equipment with characteristic urgency. The bench had been strategically placed to offer both proximity to the oak tree and a clear view of the broader park landscape. It invited sitting, watching, reflecting. Activities Micah had valued throughout his life, according to those who had known him best. He never had a home like this, Claire said suddenly, her gaze following a young family settling on a nearby picnic blanket, a place where he felt he truly belonged. But he helped make one now. Keanu considered this. The foster child shuffled through temporary placements, always anticipating the next displacement, gradually building a life defined by impermanence. Yet somehow, Micah had created enough stability to raise a daughter, to nurture students, to maintain a quiet faith in connections that persisted despite absence. I think this park was special to him, Keanu replied, even after he left. It represented something permanent in a life characterized by change. As they continued talking, a group of children approached the bench, curious about the new addition to their familiar landscape. They ranged in age from perhaps 6 to 11, a mismatched collection of heights and energies unified by shared exploration. "What's this for?" asked a girl with intricate braids and a serious expression. "It's a remembering bench," Claire explained, shifting to make room as several children promptly climbed up to test the seating. For someone who loved this park and the stories that happened here. The children seemed to accept this explanation without question, more interested in the physical reality of the bench than its symbolic significance. After a brief investigation, most raced off toward the playground, but one boy remained, studying the plaque with focused attention. "Are you him?" he asked Keanu directly, pointing to the second inscription. "The one still keeping the promise?" Keanu nodded, somewhat surprised by the direct question. "Yes." "Are you him?" he asked Keanu directly, pointing to the second inscription. "The one still keeping the promise?" Keanu nodded, somewhat surprised by the direct question. "Yes." "What was the promise?" the boy asked, his curiosity untempered by adult notions of privacy or restraint. Keanu exchanged a glance with Claire, who smiled encouragingly. "I promised to find my friend," he explained, choosing simple words for a complex history. "No matter how long it took?" The boy considered this, his expression serious beyond his years. "Did you?" "In a way," Keanu replied honestly. "Not as quickly as I should have, but eventually." This answer seemed to satisfy the child, who nodded once with the gravity of someone who understood promises and their importance. "My best friend moved to Calgary," he offered. "We promised to stay friends forever, but it's hard when you can't see each other." "It is hard," Keanu agreed. "But some friendships last, even when people are apart." "Like yours?" the boy asked. "Like mine," Keanu confirmed. Apparently satisfied with this exchange, the boy jumped down from the bench and ran to join his friends at the playground, leaving Keanu and Claire in a moment of shared recognition. The uncanny way children sometimes cut directly to essential truths that adults circle with more complicated language. "Out of the mouths of babes," Claire said softly. As the morning progressed, they remained on the bench, watching as various park visitors noticed the new addition. Some passed by with only casual interest. Others stopped to read the plaque, occasionally taking photos or sitting briefly before continuing their journeys. A few older residents paused longer, perhaps recognizing the names or simply appreciating the addition of comfortable seating to their regular route. "I should tell you something," Claire said eventually, her hand unconsciously rising to touch the key pendant at her throat. "I've found the lock." Keanu turned to her, surprised. "For the key? Where?" "In one of Dad's old journals." It wasn't a physical lock at all, not in the conventional sense. She withdrew a small notebook from her bag. This was his first teaching journal, from when he started at Northview High. Listen to this entry from his first week. She opened to a marked page and read aloud. "Today I locked away the bitterness, put it in a box where it can't touch me anymore. The key is forgiveness, not for those who failed me, but for myself. For believing I wasn't worth finding, for the years I spent waiting instead of living. I'm done with that now. I choose to move forward, to see rather than be seen, to witness rather than wait for recognition." Claire closed the journal gently. "He wrote that entry the same week he started watching your films according to his date notations. I think finding you through your work allowed him to finally let go of something he'd been carrying since childhood. The key wasn't meant to open anything, it was a symbol of what he'd already unlocked within himself." Keanu absorbed this revelation, feeling its significance settle into place like the final piece of a long unsolved puzzle. He freed himself, he said quietly, from waiting to be found. "Yes," Claire confirmed. "And in doing so, he found a different kind of connection with you, one based on witness rather than mutual presence. It allowed him to build a life without resentment or regret." The insight completed Keanu's understanding of the man Micah had become, someone who had transformed childhood abandonment into adult self-sufficiency, who had chosen to create meaning rather than await rescue. The key, far from being a mystery to solve, had been Micah's final lesson about the nature of true freedom. As noon approached, more families arrived at the park, spreading blankets on the new spring grass and unpacking picnic lunches. Several settled near the bench, drawn perhaps by its prime location or simply the availability of seating. Children played tag around the oak tree, their laughter carrying across the park in bright bursts of sound. "Who would have loved this?" Claire said, watching as a young father helped his daughter climb onto a low branch of the oak tree. The bench being used, becoming part of everyday life here. "Not a shrine," Keanu agreed, "but a living memorial." They stayed until mid-afternoon, witnessing the bench's integration into the park's ecosystem. A teenager sat briefly to finish a novel, completely absorbed. An elderly couple rested, holding hands in comfortable silence. Two young mothers chatted while keeping watchful eyes on toddlers exploring nearby bushes. Each visitor unknowingly participated in the commemoration, their ordinary moments sanctifying the space through simple use rather than ceremonial reverence. As they finally prepared to leave, a Parks Department employee approached, clipboard in hand. "Excuse me," he said, recognition flickering in his eyes as he addressed Keanu. "I just wanted to let you know we've had 3 requests already for information about the Memorial Bench program. People seem quite taken with this one." "That's wonderful," Claire replied, her expression brightening. "My father would be pleased to know he inspired others." "We're considering expanding the program," the employee continued. "Creating a reading corner near the playground with more benches and perhaps a little free library." "Would you have any objections if we informally called it Dawson's Corner?" The suggestion touched them both deeply. This extension of Micah's influence beyond the single bench they had commissioned, this integration of his name into the park's evolving identity. "I think that would be perfect," Keanu said. "As long as it remains a place for everyday use, not just commemoration." "Absolutely," the employee agreed. "That's the whole idea. Creating living spaces that honor the past while serving the present." As they walked away from the park, Claire linked her arm through Keanu's, a gesture that had become natural over their months of collaboration. "Local kids starting to gather there to read, write, and play," she said, echoing the employee's vision. "Dad would have loved that most of all." "Helm created something lasting," Keanu observed. "Through his teaching, through his writing, through you. The bench is just making visible what was already there." They reached the street where Claire's car was parked, pausing before parting ways. In the months since their initial meeting in Vancouver, their connection had evolved from strangers linked by a mutual absence to genuine friends bound by shared purpose. The completion of the film and installation of the bench marked not an ending, but a transition from intensive collaboration to a different kind of ongoing relationship. "When do you head back to LA?" Claire asked. "Tomorrow," Keanu replied. "Pre-production meetings can't be postponed any longer." He hesitated, then added, "But I'll be back for the public screening next month, and whenever I'm in Toronto after that." "The bench will be waiting," Claire said with a smile, "and so will I." As they said their goodbyes, Keanu glanced back toward Greenwood Park, where the oak tree stood visible above surrounding structures, its branches now dressed in the fresh green of new leaves. Beneath it, though no longer visible from this distance, the bench with 2 names offered rest to whoever might need it. A quiet invitation to pause, to connect, to remember that some promises, despite all odds, find their way to fulfillment. The East Toronto Youth Centre occupied a renovated warehouse in a transitional neighborhood, where gentrification had not yet erased the area's industrial past. Inside, the space had been thoughtfully divided into activity zones, an art studio with paint-splattered tables, a computer lab with carefully maintained equipment, a small library with comfortable seating, and a multi-purpose room where various programs took place throughout the week. On this particular Wednesday afternoon, the multi-purpose room hosted a circle of folding chairs occupied by 8 teenagers and Claire, who sat with a clipboard balanced on her knee. A whiteboard behind her displayed the words, "Letters to the Lost," in her neat handwriting, along with guidelines for the session. 1. Write from the heart, not the head. 2. No judgment of yourself or others. 3. Some letters may never be sent. That's okay. 4. All letters will be read by someone who cares. Today we're focusing on letters to people we've lost touch with, Claire was explaining as Keanu quietly entered the room. not necessarily people who have died, but people who were once important in your life and are now absent for whatever reason. Former friends, distant relatives, teachers who made a difference. The teens, a diverse group ranging from perhaps 14 to 18, displayed varying levels of engagement. Some leaned forward attentively, others maintained carefully cultivated expressions of indifference, and one boy at the far side of the circle seemed entirely absorbed in the complex patterns of holes in his deliberately distressed jeans. Claire noticed Keanu's arrival but continued without acknowledging him, maintaining the session's momentum. Before we start writing, let's talk about why this kind of letter can be important, even if the person never reads it. Damon, you had some thoughts on this last week. A lanky boy with close-cropped hair straightened in his chair. Yeah, it's like, sometimes you have stuff you need to say, but the person isn't around to hear it. Writing it down is better than keeping it inside where it just gets heavier. Excellent point, Claire agreed. Anyone else? It can help you figure out what you actually feel, offered a girl with vibrant blue hair and multiple ear piercings. Like sometimes you think you're angry at someone, but when you start writing, you realize you're actually sad or scared or whatever. Claire nodded encouragingly. Exactly, Zoe. Writing forces us to articulate emotions that might otherwise remain tangled inside us. She glanced toward Keanu, now including him in the conversation. Our guest today knows something about this. Some of you might recognize him. He's here to share his experience with a special kind of letter that connected him to someone he lost touch with long ago. The reaction among the teens was mixed. Immediate recognition from some, dawning realization from others, and studied nonchalance from a few, determined to appear unimpressed by celebrity. Keanu approached the circle with deliberate casualness, taking the empty chair Claire had positioned near hers. Thanks for letting me join you, he said, addressing the group rather than any individual. Claire's right. I recently received a letter from someone I'd lost contact with for almost 50 years. My childhood best friend wrote it before he died, and his daughter delivered it to me afterward. This direct acknowledgement of mortality captured even the attention of the teen still examining his genes. Death was not an abstract concept for many of these young people, who had often experienced loss in immediate and unsheltered ways. The letter changed everything, Keanu continued. It helped me understand how our lives had remained connected even when we weren't in direct contact. It created a bridge across time that allowed a kind of completion I hadn't known I needed. What did it say? Asked a girl near Claire, her expression openly curious. That's private, interjected another teen before Keanu could answer. You don't have to tell us. Keanu acknowledged both perspectives with a nod. Some details are private, yes, but the essence of it was this. My friend had been watching my journey from afar throughout his life. He'd seen my films, followed my career, taken pride in my achievements, all without my knowing it. And in his final days, he wanted me to know that our childhood promise to always find each other had been kept, just not in the way we'd imagined as kids. A thoughtful silence followed this explanation. Then the boy with the distressed jeans spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the particular blend of defensiveness and vulnerability that characterized many of the center's participants. So it was like, what, fan mail from a ghost? The bluntness of the question might have seemed disrespectful in another context, but Keanu recognized it as a test, a challenge, to prove his sincerity, to demonstrate that he wasn't just making a celebrity appearance for positive publicity. No, he replied with equal directness. It was one friend speaking to another across a lifetime of separation. He wasn't writing to Keanu Reeves, the actor. He was writing to the 13-year-old boy he'd once built a treehouse with. This answer seemed to satisfy the questioner, who gave a slight nod before returning his attention to his jeans, though with less studied indifference than before. The reason I wanted Keanu to join us today, Claire explained, bringing the discussion back to the session's purpose, is because letters like the one his friend wrote can be powerful for both the writer and the recipient. They can create understanding that might otherwise never exist. They can heal wounds, answer questions, or simply acknowledge connections that matter. She distributed notebooks and pens from a canvas bag beside her chair. For the next 20 minutes, I'd like each of you to write a letter to someone you've lost touch with. It could be anyone, a former friend who moved away, a relative you've become estranged from, even a younger version of yourself. The only rule is honesty. As the teens began writing, some immediately bent over their notebooks with purpose, others staring at blank pages with uncertain expressions. Claire and Keanu moved to a small table at the side of the room, giving the group space while remaining available for questions. "They're amazing," Keanu said quietly, watching as even the most initially resistant participants gradually engaged with the exercise. So much more direct than adults. "That's why I love working with them," Claire agreed. "They have incredible bullshit detectors, but once they trust you, they're all in." She arranged a stack of envelopes on the table. "We've been running this program for 3 months now. It started with just 4 kids, but word has spread." "Your father would be proud," Keanu observed. "This is exactly the kind of impact he had as a teacher, according to what we learned." Claire nodded, a familiar mixture of grief and pride crossing her face whenever Micah was mentioned. "The funding you provided made it possible, but I think his influence gave it heart." After establishing Letters to the Lost as a pilot program at the East Toronto Youth Centre, Keanu had quietly provided financial support to expand it to other locations. Unlike many celebrity philanthropic efforts, his involvement remained largely anonymous. His name appeared on no materials, and his occasional visits happened without publicity or fanfare. What mattered was the program itself, not who funded it. As the writing period concluded, Claire invited participants to share if they felt comfortable doing so. To Keanu's surprise, nearly every teen chose to read at least a portion of their letter aloud. The contents ranged from anger to forgiveness, from grief to gratitude, from accusation to apology, each an authentic expression of young people working to understand relationships that had shaped them, for better or worse. One letter in particular caught Keanu's attention, from a quiet girl who had barely spoken during the introductory discussion. She read in a soft but steady voice, "Dear Dad, I don't know where you are now or if you ever think about me. Mom says you left because you weren't ready for responsibility, but sometimes I wonder if you left because of something I did, even though I was just a baby then." The honesty of her words, the vulnerable questioning that underlay them, created a palpable heaviness in the room. When she finished reading, several other teens offered small gestures of support, a hand briefly touching her shoulder, a nod of understanding, a murmured, "That was brave." After the sharing circle concluded and the teens began dispersing to other activities, this same girl approached Claire and Keanu with her letter, carefully folded in her hands. "You said all letters get read," she said, her eyes fixed on Claire, "even if they can't be sent." "That's right," Claire confirmed, gently accepting the folded paper. "Would you like me to read it now or later in private?" "Later is okay," the girl replied. Then, turning slightly toward Keanu, she added, "I wish someone like Micah was my dad." The comment, delivered with such simple directness, caught Keanu off guard. He exchanged a glance with Claire, who looked equally moved. "From everything I've learned about him," Keanu said carefully, "I think he would have been honored by that comparison." After the girl walked away, Claire carefully placed her letter in a box designated for such communications, those that could not or would not be delivered but still deserved acknowledgement. "That happens more often than you might expect," she said quietly. "These kids are carrying so much unspoken grief, so many interrupted connections." Keanu nodded, understanding in a new way the value of what the program offered. Not resolution necessarily, but recognition. The simple power of saying, "I see your loss. I witness your pain. Your words matter, even when they cannot reach their intended recipient." "He's still showing up?" Keanu observed, thinking of Micah's legacy extending through Claire to these young people navigating their own experiences of abandonment and loss. "Through this program? Through you? Through all of it?" Claire smiled, the expression holding both sadness and satisfaction. That's the thing about genuine influence, isn't it? It continues beyond presence, beyond lifetime even. As they prepared to leave the youth center, Keanu paused in the doorway, watching as the teens transitioned to other activities, some heading to the art studio, others to the computer lab, a few lingering to talk with counselors or each other, each carrying their own stories of disconnection, each seeking ways to articulate experiences too complex for casual conversation. Letters to the Lost had begun as a tribute to one specific interrupted friendship, one particular undelivered message. But like Micah's influence itself, it had grown beyond its origins, creating space for many voices, many stories, many possibilities for reconnection, even if only within the letter writers themselves. The storage facility on the outskirts of Toronto resembled countless others across North America. Rows of identical metal units with roll-up doors, surrounded by security fencing and monitored by cameras that swiveled mechanically to track movement. Claire had rented a small unit to house items from her father's apartment that she wasn't ready to part with, but couldn't accommodate in her New York graduate housing. On this overcast Saturday morning, she and Keanu stood before the open door of Unit 247, surveying cardboard boxes stacked in neat columns and furniture draped with protective covers. Keanu had flown in specifically for this task, the final sorting of Micah's personal papers before Claire's move to New York the following week. "I found it yesterday," Claire explained, leading Keanu to a plastic storage bin she'd positioned near the unit's entrance. "I was going through the last boxes from Dad's closet and discovered this, hidden in an old duffel bag." She lifted the bin's lid to reveal a collection of identical black composition notebooks, their marbled covers instantly recognizable to anyone who had passed through the American educational system. Each bore a year, written in Micah's neat handwriting on a white label, a chronological sequence spanning from 1985 to 2023. "His private journals," Claire said, her voice holding a mixture of reverence and uncertainty. "I never knew he kept them so consistently. He had other notebooks I was familiar with, teaching journals, writing notebooks, but these were deliberately hidden." Keanu regarded the collection with appropriate gravity, understanding the intimate nature of what they were about to explore. "Are you sure you want to read them? He may have hidden them for a reason." "I've been asking myself that since I found them," Claire admitted. But there was this note, taped to the top notebook. She handed Keanu a small index card covered in Micah's handwriting. "For Claire and Keanu, if he's found his way to you as I believe he will, these journals contain my unsent letters, thoughts I never shared but couldn't release. Some may be difficult to read. All represent truth as I understood it at the time. I leave them in your hands now, to read or not, to share or keep private, as feels right to you both. With love beyond words, Dad." Keanu read the note twice, struck by Micah's foresight, his confidence that Claire would find Keanu, that they would form the connection that had indeed developed, that they would eventually discover these hidden writings together. "Hell knew," Keanu said softly. Somehow, he knew how this would unfold. He always had this uncanny intuition about how stories would develop, Claire agreed. As if he could see narrative patterns before they fully formed. She lifted the most recent journal from the bin. "I opened this one last night. It contains entries addressed to you, spanning decades. Letters he wrote but never sent." They carried the bin outside to a small table and chairs Claire had set up in the facility's designated break area, a concrete pad with vending machines and an umbrella-shaded picnic table. The space wasn't luxurious, but it offered privacy and enough comfort for their purpose. As Claire arranged the notebooks in chronological order, Keanu noticed her hands trembling slightly. "We don't have to do this now," he said gently, "or at all, if it feels too invasive." "No, I want to," Claire replied with quiet determination. "Dad left these for us specifically. And I think they might help complete the picture we've been assembling these past months." They began with the earliest journal, dated 1985. Inside, interspersed with ordinary daily entries, were letters addressed to various people from Micah's past. Foster parents, both kind and cruel, social workers who had tried to help or failed to see his needs, teachers who had recognized his potential or dismissed him as troublesome. And, appearing regularly throughout, letters to Keanu, sometimes prompted by seeing a new film or interview, sometimes by random memories that surfaced unexpectedly, sometimes by significant life events Micah wished to share with the friend who remained present in his thoughts despite physical absence. October 12, 1985. Dear Keanu, saw you in a movie today. A small part, but I recognized you immediately. You moved differently, more confidence, more presence, but your eyes were the same. Still watching everything, taking it all in. I wanted to stand up in the theater and tell everyone there, I knew him when we were kids. We built a treehouse together. But of course, I didn't. Some connections aren't meant for public display. I wonder if you remember the promise. Under the oak tree, summer of '73. I'll always find you, you said. I believed you then. Part of me still does, though logic says otherwise. You couldn't have found me even if you tried. Too many moves, too many name changes in the system, too many covered tracks. Maybe it's better this way. You're heading somewhere important. I can see it even in these small roles. My life is smaller. Teaching high school English in Windsor, dating someone who probably won't last, still writing stories I never show anyone. Our paths diverged for a reason, perhaps. Still, I saw you today, and for a moment I was 13 again, believing in impossible promises. Micah? The entries continued through the years, documenting Micah's life indirectly through what he chose to share with his absent friend. His first teaching position, meeting Claire's mother, their wedding, the birth of their daughter, his wife's illness and death, Claire's childhood milestones, ordinary life events rendered extraordinary through the lens of what he imagined sharing with the friend of his youth. June 3, 1997. Dear Keanu, Claire took her first steps today. Across the living room carpet, 5 wobbly steps before tumbling into my arms. Nancy and I cheered like she'd won an Olympic medal. In a way, I suppose she had. I wish you could see her. She has Nancy's curls and my stubbornness, poor kid. Sometimes I tell her stories about when we were boys, and she looks at me with such concentration, as if memorizing every detail. Tell about the treehouse again, she'll say, or what about the time you rode bikes in the storm? I've edited some of our more dangerous adventures, of course. Don't want to give her ideas. Your new film opened last weekend. Nancy and I got a sitter and went to the early showing. Afterward, she asked if I ever think about contacting you. I said no. What would be the point? You're you now, and I'm me. Different planets, different orbits. But I confess, I sometimes wonder what would happen if we met again. Would there be any trace of recognition? Any echo of the boys we were? Or has time erased all but the most superficial connection? Better not to know, perhaps. Better to preserve what was rather than confront what is. Micah. As they continued reading through selected entries, a pattern emerged in Micah's unsent correspondence, an evolution from curiosity about what might have been, to acceptance of separate paths, to a kind of peace with the unresolved nature of their connection. The last journal, covering 20222023, showed a final transformation as Micah faced his terminal diagnosis. February 15, 2023. Dear Keanu, the tests came back today. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. Months, they say, not years. Everything suddenly has a deadline, including these letters I've been writing for decades. Strange how clarity arrives with finality. I've been thinking about our promise. I'll always find you. And I realize now that it was fulfilled, just not as we expected. You found me through your work, through films that somehow always seem to arrive at exactly the moments I needed them, through interviews where I recognized glimpses of the thoughtful boy beneath the public persona. And I found you too, in my way, by witnessing your journey from afar, by carrying the memory of our friendship as a reminder that I was once worth finding, worth promising to. Claire needs to meet you, not for any dramatic reason, but because your story and mine, our story, deserves completion. The circle that began under that oak tree needs closing, not for my sake, but for the sake of the narrative itself. Some stories demand proper endings. I'll ask her to find you after I'm gone. She will, I know. She has my persistence and her mother's charm, a formidable combination. When she does, I hope you'll understand why I never reached out directly. It wasn't pride or bitterness. It was a recognition that some connections work best as invisible threads rather than tangible bonds. You kept me going, even when I disappeared. Micah. The afternoon stretched into evening as Keanu and Claire continued reading selected entries from Micah's journals, occasionally pausing to share particularly resonant passages or to sit in companionable silence, absorbing the emotional weight of what they were discovering. The storage facility's fluorescent lights had automatically activated with the fading daylight, casting a harsh glow that seemed at odds with the intimate nature of their exploration. "I think that's enough for today," Claire said finally, closing the journal from 2010 with careful hands. "These aren't meant to be consumed all at once." Keanu nodded, understanding completely. The journals represented decades of Micah's inner life, his hopes, fears, observations, and regrets, all filtered through the lens of imagined communication with his childhood friend. Reading them was like having a one-sided conversation across time, hearing Micah's voice with increasing clarity, but unable to respond to what he had shared. "There's something else," Claire said as they packed the notebooks back into their storage bin. "Something Dad prepared specifically for you." She disappeared into the storage unit and returned carrying a small wooden box about the size of a hardcover book. Its surface was polished to a soft shine, the wood grain visible beneath a clear finish. Unlike the carved box that had held the mysterious key, this one was simpler in design. Its only adornment a small brass plate on the lid, engraved with Keanu's name. "I found this with the journals," Claire explained, handling the box with evident care. "There was a note saying it should be given to you only after we'd read the journals together." She passed it to Keanu, who accepted it with a sensation of both anticipation and trepidation. The box felt substantial in his hands, its weight suggesting significant contents rather than mere tokens. "Should I open it now?" he asked, his fingers tracing the engraved letters of his name. Claire nodded. "I think that's what he intended." Keanu carefully lifted the lid to reveal the box's contents, a handcrafted fountain pen nestled in a bed of dark blue velvet, accompanied by a small card in Micah's now familiar handwriting. The pen was clearly of high quality, its barrel made of polished wood that complemented the box, its nib a gleaming gold, its overall design suggesting both elegance and functionality. He lifted the card and read it aloud, sharing Micah's final message with Claire. "For when you're ready to write our ending, not as it was, but as it might have been, or perhaps as it still could be." The simplicity of the message belied its emotional impact. Keanu sat very still, holding the pen as if it were something infinitely more precious than its material components would suggest. "He was always giving his students pens," Claire said softly. "Special ones for graduation, for college acceptances, for personal milestones. He believed there was something sacred about the physical act of writing, the connection between mind and hand and paper that couldn't be replicated by typing." Keanu nodded, understanding intuitively why Micah had chosen this particular gift as his final communication. "He waited," he said, carefully returning the pen to its velvet nest. "And now it's my turn to carry him forward." The phrase seemed to emerge from somewhere deeper than conscious thought, a recognition of the responsibility that had been entrusted to him through Micah's unsent letters, through Claire's fulfillment of her promise to find him, through the pen that now invited continuation rather than conclusion. "What will you write?" Claire asked. "I'm not sure yet," Keanu admitted, closing the box with deliberate care. "Something that won't just entertain but remember. something that honors both who he was and what might have been. They packed the remaining materials back into the storage unit and locked it securely, both feeling the weight of the day's discoveries. The journals had provided a deeper understanding of Micah, not just the public person his colleagues and students had known, or even the father Claire had loved, but the inner self that had maintained a private dialogue with an absent friend throughout decades of separation. "Would you like to get dinner?" Claire asked as they walked toward the parking lot. "I'm not ready to be alone with all of this quite yet." "Me neither," Keanu agreed. They drove separately to a small restaurant Claire recommended, a family-owned Italian place where her father had often taken her for birthday dinners and special occasions. The hostess greeted Claire with warm recognition, leading them to a quiet corner table where conversation could happen without interruption. After ordering, they sat in contemplative silence for a moment before Claire spoke. "I keep thinking about something I found in one of the journals, from 2008, I think. Dad wrote about seeing an interview where you mentioned a childhood friend who had taught you about loyalty. He wondered if that friend might have been him." Keanu searched his memory, trying to place the interview she referenced. "It probably was," he said finally. "I've often thought about our friendship when asked about formative relationships. I just never used his name, partly for privacy and partly because I didn't know where life had taken him." "It meant a lot to him," Claire said, "that the connection might have mattered to you too, even if you didn't stay in touch." "It did matter," Keanu confirmed, "more than I realized until recently. There's something about childhood friendships. They become part of your foundation in ways adult relationships rarely do." Their food arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. As they began eating, Keanu found himself thinking about the pen, about Micah's invitation to write our ending, about the responsibility of carrying someone else's story forward with integrity and purpose. "I've been thinking about the film," he said after a while, "about where it might go from here." The Two Stars had completed a limited theatrical release and was now available on selected streaming platforms. Reviews had been largely positive, with particular praise for its emotional authenticity and nuanced exploration of male friendship. It wasn't a commercial blockbuster, but it had found an appreciative audience and continued to build momentum through word-of-mouth recommendations. "What are you thinking?" Claire asked, her expression curious. "That it's not just Micah's and my story anymore," Keanu replied. "It's become something larger, a way for people to reflect on their own lost connections, their own parallel journeys, with those who once mattered deeply to them." Claire nodded, understanding immediately. "The Letters program at the youth center has shown me how universal that experience is, having someone significant disappear from your life, carrying questions that may never be answered." "Exactly," Keanu agreed. "I've been thinking about developing a feature-length version that expands beyond our specific experience. Not a direct sequel, but a companion piece that explores different types of parallel journeys." Claire's eyes lit up with understanding, something that captures the essence without being limited by the specifics. "Yes," Keanu said, feeling a growing sense of creative purpose. "I think that's what Micah was suggesting with his gift, not just to document what happened, but to imagine what might still be possible when separated lives find their way back to each other." Their conversation continued through dinner, touching on possibilities for the expanded project. Potential storylines, thematic elements, the delicate balance between fiction and reality. By the time they finished their meal, a framework had begun to take shape. Not yet a fully formed concept, but the living seed of something meaningful. Outside the restaurant, the evening had turned cool, stars puncturing the darkness above the city lights. They stood for a moment on the sidewalk, reluctant to end the evening. "I should probably get home," Claire said eventually. "I have classes to teach tomorrow." Keanu nodded. "Thank you for dinner, and for today, for sharing those journals with me." "Thank you for being the person my father always believed you were," Claire replied simply. They parted with a brief hug, each carrying away the weight and wonder of the day's revelations. In the following weeks, Keanu found himself drawn repeatedly to the wooden box and its contents. Sometimes he would simply hold the pen, feeling its balance and weight, allowing memories and impressions to flow through him without immediate direction. Other times, he would sit at his desk with a leather-bound notebook open before him, writing fragments that might eventually coalesce into something cohesive. He began carrying the notebook everywhere, jotting down observations, dialogue snippets, scene ideas, and character notes. The process felt different from his usual approach to role preparation or creative projects. More organic, less structured, guided by intuition rather than analytical thought. One evening, about a month after receiving Micah's gift, Keanu found himself on a video call with Claire, sharing some of what he had written. "It's still taking shape," he cautioned as he prepared to read a passage. "Nothing definitive yet." "I understand," Claire assured him. "The process matters as much as the outcome." He read a scene describing two elderly men meeting by chance in a hospital waiting room, gradually recognizing each other as childhood friends, separated by circumstances beyond their control. As he read, he could see Claire's expression shifting through various emotions: recognition, empathy, hope. "That's beautiful," she said when he finished. "It captures something essential about reconnection, how it can happen when we least expect it, how recognition can be both immediate and incremental." "It's just a beginning," Keanu said, closing the notebook, "but it feels right somehow." "Dad would love it," Claire said with quiet certainty. "Especially the hospital setting, places where people are vulnerable often reveal their truest selves." They continued talking, exchanging ideas and impressions. Claire shared stories from her father's teaching career, moments when he had recognized potential in struggling students, when he had used storytelling to illuminate difficult concepts, when he had demonstrated the same patience and faith that characterized his long wait for Keanu to remember him. "He never lost hope," she said, even when logic suggested he should. "He just kept believing the connection would complete itself somehow." "That's what I want to capture in this screenplay," Keanu replied. "Not just friendship or loss or reunion, but that persistent faith, the choice to believe in possibilities rather than accepting apparent endings." As winter deepened into spring, the project continued to evolve. Keanu began working with a screenwriter he trusted, sharing Micah's story and his vision for transforming it into something universal while preserving its emotional core. They developed characters inspired by, but not identical to, Keanu and Micah, allowing the narrative freedom to explore alternate paths while honoring the authentic emotional journey. The screenplay, tentatively titled Faithful, followed two childhood friends separated by circumstances, whose lives took radically different directions but remained invisibly connected through shared memories, parallel experiences, and the subtle ways each had shaped the other's worldview. Their eventual reunion came not through dramatic coincidence but through deliberate choice. One seeking, one waiting, both recognizing that some bonds transcend absence. 3 months after receiving Micah's gift, Keanu invited Claire to his home for a first reading of the completed screenplay draft. They sat in his living room, warm spring light filtering through the windows, as Claire read through the pages with careful attention. When she finished, she sat quietly for several minutes, the manuscript resting in her lap. "It's not exactly our story," Keanu said, breaking the silence, "but it carries the essence of it. What your father meant to me then, what his memory means now, what your bringing us together has created." Claire nodded, wiping away tears that had gathered at the corners of her eyes. "It feels true," she said simply, "not just to what happened, but to what matters about what happened." She reached into her bag and brought out a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "I was waiting for the right moment to give you this," she explained, handing it to him. "I think this is it." Keanu unwrapped the package to find a small, leather-bound journal, similar to the one he had been using but clearly older, its cover softened by years of handling. "It was his last one," Claire explained. "He started it just before his diagnosis and continued writing in it through his treatment. The last entry is dated 3 days before he died." Keanu opened it carefully, noting that unlike the journals they had read together, this one wasn't addressed to him, but appeared to be Micah's personal reflections. "Are you sure?" he asked, aware of the intimate nature of such a gift. Claire nodded. "He left a note with it saying I should decide what happened to it. After reading your screenplay, I know this is where it belongs, with the person who's carrying his story forward." Keanu accepted the journal with profound gratitude, understanding the trust implicit in such a gift. "I'll honor it," he promised. "I know," Claire said simply. As the day's light began to fade, they talked about next steps for the screenplay. Potential directors, production timelines, the delicate balance of publicity that would allow the film to find its audience without exploiting the private story that had inspired it. "Whatever happens with the film," Keanu said as Claire prepared to leave, "the real gift has been reconnecting with Micah through you, discovering that the friendship never really ended, it just transformed." Claire smiled, recognizing the truth in his words. "Some connections are meant to endure," she said. "They just need someone willing to keep faith with them." As she drove away, Keanu returned to his desk where both notebooks now sat, his own filled with creative explorations and Micah's containing his final thoughts. Together, they represented the journey from past to present, from separation to connection, from silence to... He opened Micah's journal to the first page and began to read, feeling not like an intruder, but like a welcome guest in his friend's inner world. The pen Micah had given him lay beside the notebooks, not just a tool for writing, but a symbol of continuity, a means of ensuring that what mattered would be remembered, shared, and carried forward into an unfolding future. He aided, but Keanu whispered again, touching the pen with reverent fingers. "And now it's my turn to carry him forward." The recording studio was intentionally small, an intimate space with just enough room for essential equipment, a few chairs, and the recording booth itself. Keanu had specifically requested this particular studio for its warmth, its absence of corporate sleekness, its feeling of creative sanctuary rather than commercial facility. "We could use one of the larger studios," the sound engineer had suggested when arrangements were being made. "Something with more space for your team." "No team today," Keanu had replied. "Just me. And the space isn't for recording a blockbuster, it's for honoring a promise." Now, on a quiet Sunday morning when most of the building stood empty, Keanu sat alone in the control room, reviewing the script pages one last time before recording. In the months since completing the screenplay for Faithful, production had moved forward with surprising momentum. A respected indie director had connected deeply with the material, fundraising had come together smoothly, and filming was set to begin in Toronto within weeks. But before production commenced, there was this. The final voiceover for The Two Stars, the short film that had started the journey. The original release had ended with temporary narration, always intended to be replaced once Keanu found the right words. Now, with Micah's journals providing those words, the time had come to complete what they had begun together as children. A gentle knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. The audio engineer, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the focused demeanor of someone who took sound very seriously, entered with 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," she said, placing 1 cup beside him. "Nervous?" Keanu accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. "Not nervous exactly," he replied. "More aware of the significance. These aren't just lines I'm reading. They're someone's actual words. Someone who isn't here to hear them spoken." The engineer, Sarah, according to the small nameplate on her shirt, nodded with understanding. "Those are always the hardest," she said, "when they matter most." She moved to her station, checking equipment settings with practiced efficiency. "Take your time," she advised. "We've got the studio blocked for the full day if needed." Keanu appreciated her sensitivity. Though she clearly knew who he was, she had maintained a professional distance that respected the personal nature of this project. "I'd like to do a test run first," he said, "just to get comfortable with the acoustics." "Whenever you're ready," Sarah replied, adjusting her headphones. Keanu entered the recording booth, settled into the chair, and positioned the microphone. The space felt both constraining and sheltering, cutting him off from the outside world while creating a container for the emotional vulnerability the recording would require. He began with technical tests, speaking phrases to check levels and acoustics. Once satisfied, he nodded to Sarah through the glass partition. "I'd like to try the opening paragraph," he said, "just to get the feel of it." She gave him a thumbs up and started recording. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself in the space between memory and presence. Then he began to read. "When I was 13, I made a promise to my best friend. We stood beneath an oak tree that seemed ancient to our young eyes, the sunlight filtering through leaves like nature's own spotlight. I promised I would find him, no matter where life took us. What I couldn't know then was how that promise would echo across decades, not as a burden, but as a constellation by which I would navigate my way home." He paused, looked up at Sarah, who smiled encouragingly. "That was beautiful," she said through the intercom. "The levels are perfect. Are you ready to move forward with a full piece?" Keanu nodded, taking a sip of water. "Yes." "Let's do it from the beginning." For the next hour, he read through the carefully crafted narration, a blend of Micah's journal entries and new material that provided context and continuity. The words flowed naturally, as if the years of separation had dissolved, allowing the two friends to speak together through this shared medium. As he approached the final section, Micah's last journal entry, written just days before his death, Keanu felt his throat tightening with emotion. He paused, took a deep breath, and signaled to Sarah that he needed a moment. She nodded understandingly, switching off the recording temporarily. "Take your time," she said again. Keanu closed his eyes, remembering Micah as he had last seen him. Not the grown man he had never met, but the 13-year-old boy with bright eyes and an irrepressible imagination. He thought of the oak tree where they had made their promise, of the comic book they had created together, of Claire continuing her father's legacy. When he felt ready, he nodded to Sarah, who reactivated the recording. His voice, when he began again, carried the weight of all these thoughts, yet remained clear and steady. "As I look back across the landscape of my life, I see now that friendship doesn't follow a straight line. It meanders like a river, sometimes visible, sometimes underground, but always moving forward. I never stopped believing you would remember our promise, not because you owed me anything, but because what we shared was real, and real things don't vanish. They transform." He paused, feeling the truth of the words resonating in his chest. "I have lived a life with many empty spaces, places where families should have been, where stability should have existed, where dreams should have flourished. But I've never seen these as absences so much as possibilities, room for what might yet arrive. And in that space, our friendship continued to grow even in silence." Another pause, another breath. "If you're hearing these words, it means two things: that I'm gone and that you remembered. Both are as they should be. Life continues its forward motion. But here's what I've learned in my years of teaching young minds to find their voices. Real friendship doesn't fade. It waits. It watches. And if you're lucky, it finds its way home." His voice cracked slightly on the final words, not from technical failure but from authentic emotion breaking through professional control. Rather than stopping, he allowed the vulnerability to become part of the performance, honoring both the words and their source. When the final line had been spoken and the recording light dimmed, silence filled the booth. Keanu sat very still, hands resting on the script, eyes closed, allowing the moment to settle around him. Through the intercom, Sarah's voice came softly. "I don't have words." Keanu opened his eyes, nodded in acknowledgement of her comment. "Would you mind if I sat here for a few minutes?" he asked. "Take all the time you need," she replied, removing her headphones and stepping away from the console to give him privacy. Alone in the booth, Keanu placed his hands on the microphone, the instrument that had just carried Micah's words out into the world. "Thank you, Micah," he whispered, "for never letting me forget." The whisper wasn't recorded. No machinery captured it. but it filled the small space with the essence of gratitude that transcended the technical processes of filmmaking. Eventually, he emerged from the booth to review the recording with Sarah. They listened together, making minor adjustments to pacing and levels, ensuring the technical quality matched the emotional authenticity of the performance. "This is special," Sarah commented as they finalized the edits. "I've worked on a lot of voiceovers, commercials, documentaries, major films, but this, it has a different quality. It's a different kind of truth," Keanu acknowledged. By early afternoon, the recording was complete, the final element needed to truly finish the two stars. Before leaving, Keanu thanked Sarah for her patience and sensitivity throughout the session. "It was an honor," she replied simply. Outside, the day had turned unexpectedly beautiful. Clear skies, gentle breeze, the world seeming somehow more vivid than when he had entered the studio hours earlier. Keanu walked slowly to his car, in no hurry to break the contemplative mood that had settled over him. He drove not to his hotel, but to a park on the outskirts of the city, where large oak trees lined a winding path. It wasn't the same park where he and Micah had made their promise. That one was thousands of miles away. But it carried a similar feeling of natural sanctuary. Finding a bench beneath one of the larger trees, Keanu sat and watched as families played, couples strolled, and solitary figures moved through their private worlds. All these lives intersecting briefly in this shared space before continuing on their separate journeys. He thought about voices, how they carried meaning beyond their words, how they connected people across time and space, how Micah's voice had finally been heard through the medium they had both loved as children. As the afternoon light began to soften toward evening, Keanu took out his phone and called Claire. When she answered, he said simply, "It's done. His words are part of the film now." "How did it feel?" she asked. "Like completing a circuit," he replied. "Like electricity finally flowing through wires that have been waiting to carry current." "That's how Dad would have described it," Claire said, her smile evident in her voice. "He always used metaphors like that in his teaching." They talked for a while about the upcoming production of Faithful, about Claire's plans to visit the set during filming, about the strange symmetry of creating stories that both honored the past and opened pathways to the future. As they were about to end the call, Claire said, "I keep thinking about something Dad wrote in one of his journals, about how stories aren't really about events, but about the meaning we make from them. That's what today felt like," Keanu replied. "Not just recording words, but acknowledging their meaning." After hanging up, he remained on the bench, watching as the park slowly emptied with the approaching evening. The oak tree above him cast lengthening shadows across the grass, a reminder of time's passage and the perspective it brings. In the recording booth, he had given voice to Micah's words. Here, in the quiet of approaching dusk, he honored the silence that had separated them. Not as absence, but as the space that had allowed their connection to expand beyond the limitations of direct contact into something more encompassing. Eventually, he rose and walked back to his car, carrying with him the quiet certainty that some stories never truly end. They simply continue their unfolding in ways that transcend conventional narrative. The youth center's multi-purpose room had been transformed for the evening event. Rows of folding chairs faced a small stage area where a podium stood flanked by potted plants. On the wall behind, a screen displayed a rotating slideshow of photographs, young people writing, reading, engaged in group activities, their faces alive with concentration and occasional bursts of joy. Claire stood just off stage, reviewing her notes one last time. Though she had been teaching for years, public speaking to a mixed audience of community members, donors, and program participants still triggered a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. 5 minutes, the program coordinator whispered, giving her an encouraging smile. Claire nodded, taking a deep breath. The room was filling rapidly, more people than she had expected for a weeknight event at a community center. But Letters to the Lost had grown significantly in the months since its inception, expanding from a single location to a network of programs across several cities. each adapting the core concept to serve their specific communities. Tonight's gathering was both celebration and fundraiser, an opportunity to share the program's impact and secure support for its continuation. As the founder and lead facilitator, Claire had been asked to speak about its origins and evolution. She scanned the audience from her partially concealed vantage point. Keanu had planned to attend, but had texted earlier with apologies. Unexpected production meetings for Faithful had made travel impossible. Though disappointed, Claire understood. The film was entering its final pre-production phase, with shooting scheduled to begin in just 2 weeks. The coordinator approached again. "We're ready for you," she said. "The director will introduce you after his welcome remarks." Claire moved closer to the stage entrance, listening as the center's director welcomed the audience and spoke briefly about the importance of programs that address the emotional needs of young people, particularly those experiencing separation and loss. "And now," he concluded, "I'm honored to introduce Claire Dawson, the visionary educator who created Letters to the Lost and has guided its development over the past year. Please, welcome Claire." The applause was warm as Claire walked to the podium, her nervousness receding as she focused on the purpose of her presence. This wasn't about her. It was about the young people who had found their voices through the program, about the power of written expression to process complex emotions, about her father's legacy, living on in unexpected ways. "Thank you for that kind introduction," she began. "And thank you all for coming tonight to support a program that began with a simple premise, that writing can be a bridge across absence, that expressing what we feel, even when there's no guarantee of response, can be a powerful act of both healing and connection." She paused, making eye contact with different sections of the audience. Letters to the Lost originated in a deeply personal experience. Many of you know parts of this story through media coverage or conversations within our community. But tonight, I'd like to share the fuller context. How a promise kept over 50 years led to a program that's now helping hundreds of young people process their experiences of separation and loss. Over the next 20 minutes, Claire shared the story of her father and Keanu, their childhood friendship, their involuntary separation, her father's lifelong connection to that memory, and her own journey to fulfill his final wish by finding his lost friend. She spoke of the journals, the film that resulted from their reconnection, and how these experiences had illuminated the power of maintaining bonds across time and circumstance. "My father waited his entire life for a reunion that happened only through me, after his death," she said. "But what's remarkable isn't the waiting itself, it's what that waiting created. In the space where direct connection might have existed, he built a life of meaning. He taught hundreds of students to express themselves through writing. He raised me with stories that preserved his most significant friendship. He maintained a private dialogue through journals that eventually found their intended audience." She gestured toward the screen behind her, now showing photographs of young people engaged in the letter-writing program. "That's the inspiration behind Letters to the Lost." Not every separation can be bridged in life. Not every absence can be filled. But in expressing our truths to those who cannot hear them, at least not directly, we claim our own voices and acknowledge the continuing significance of these connections. Claire described how the program worked, providing young people, primarily those in foster care or experiencing family disruption, with structured opportunities to write letters to people absent from their lives. Some letters were sent if appropriate channels existed. Others remained private or were shared only within the supportive community of the program. All were treated as significant expressions, deserving of respect and response. "We don't promise reunions," Claire explained. "That would be both unrealistic and potentially harmful. What we offer instead is acknowledgement of feelings, of meaningful connections, of the human need to be known and remembered. And in that acknowledgement, many participants discover their own capacity for resilience and continued growth." As she concluded her formal remarks, Claire invited 2 program participants to join her on stage, a teenage girl named Micah and a younger boy, Elijah, both currently in foster care. With their permission, she had arranged for them to share brief reflections on their experiences with the program. Elijah spoke first, his voice initially hesitant but gaining confidence as he described writing letters to his mother, who struggled with addiction and had been inconsistently present in his life. "I used to think I shouldn't miss her when she wasn't there," he said with startling clarity for a 10-year-old, "like I was doing something wrong by still loving her. The letters helped me understand I can keep that love without it hurting so much." Maya's experience was different. She had used the program to write to a grandfather she had never met, whose existence she had discovered through family photographs. "Even though I know he'll never read what I write, it helps me feel connected to my history," she explained. "Like I'm part of something bigger than just me and my current situation." Claire thanked them both, acknowledging their courage in sharing such personal experiences with the audience. As they returned to their seats, she offered her closing thoughts. "What these young people demonstrate is something my father understood intuitively. That connection transcends physical presence, that meaningful bonds continue to shape us even when direct communication isn't possible." He waited for Keanu because some promises are stronger than time. And in that waiting, he created ripples that continue to spread outward, touching lives he never knew. The applause was sustained as Claire concluded, several audience members rising to their feet in appreciation. The program continued with remarks from donors and community partners, but Claire's portion was complete. She moved to a seat in the front row, experiencing the familiar mixture of relief and exhilaration that followed public speaking. After the formal program ended, many attendees approached to share their responses, ask questions about the program, or offer support. Claire spoke with each person attentively, aware that such conversations often reveal deeper connections to the themes she had discussed. Personal experiences of separation, loss, and the search for resolution. Near the end of the evening, as the crowd had thinned considerably, a young girl approached, perhaps 11 or 12, accompanied by a woman who appeared to be her foster mother. The girl had dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and eyes that seemed older than her physical appearance. "Ms. Dawson," she said, her voice quiet but direct, "I wanted to thank you for starting the letters program. It's helped me a lot." Claire smiled, crouching slightly to meet the girl at eye level. "I'm so glad to hear that. Are you a participant at one of our sites?" The girl nodded. "At Westwood Center. I've been writing to my dad. He died when I was 7. "I'm sorry for your loss," Claire said, noting the matter-of-fact way the girl shared this information, not without emotion, but with the directness children often bring to profound realities. "It's okay," the girl replied. "I was really sad for a long time, but writing the letters helps me remember the good parts." Her foster mother placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Emma has been in the program for 4 months," she explained. "Her caseworker says she's seen remarkable improvement in her emotional regulation and academic performance." Emma looked up at the woman with a small smile before turning back to Claire. "I think my dad would have loved your dad," she said with surprising insight. "He was a writer too, not a teacher, but he wrote stories for me every night." Claire felt a familiar tightening in her throat, the sensation that often accompanied these moments of unexpected connection. "Then maybe they're friends now," she said softly. Emma considered this possibility with serious contemplation. "I like that idea," she said finally. "I'm going to write about it in my next letter." After they moved on, Claire remained standing in the rapidly emptying room, struck by the simple profundity of the exchange. This was what her father had created through his patient waiting, what Keanu had amplified through his receptive recognition, what she herself was extending through the letters program. A continuous chain of acknowledgement that transformed absence into presence, separation into connection. Her phone vibrated with an incoming text. She checked it to find a message from Keanu. "Sorry to miss tonight. How did it go?" She typed a quick reply. "Better than expected. Full house. Great response. Just met a girl who says her dad would have loved my dad. Told her maybe they're friends now." His response came moments later. "They probably are. Your father had a gift for friendship that transcended normal boundaries. Seems to run in the family." Claire smiled, pocketing her phone as she helped the center staff with the final cleanup. Her father had spent decades maintaining a connection to someone physically absent. Now, through the chain of events that absence had set in motion, hundreds of young people were finding ways to transform their own experiences of separation into sources of meaning and growth. As she drove home through the quiet evening streets, Claire thought about the recursive nature of influence, how Micah had shaped Keanu, how Keanu's response had shaped her understanding of her father, how their collective story was now shaping programs that reached young people like Emma, whose own story would continue the unfolding pattern in ways yet to be revealed. Some absences could never be filled directly. Some questions would remain unanswered. But in the space between what was lost and what remained, new possibilities continued to emerge. Not as replacements for what was missing, but as evidence that meaningful connections transcended the limitations of circumstance, continuing to generate ripples long after their initial creation. The memorial bench gleamed in the late afternoon sunlight, its polished wood surface catching the golden rays filtering through the oak leaves above. It had been almost 18 months since its installation, long enough for the newness to fade, for the bench to become an integrated part of the park landscape, for local residents to adopt it as a familiar landmark rather than a novel addition. Keanu sat alone on the bench, the park relatively quiet on this weekday afternoon. A dog walker passed by with 3 terriers trotting efficiently ahead of him. A young mother pushed a stroller along the winding path, her soft singing carrying faintly on the breeze. 2 elderly men played chess at a concrete table nearby, their concentration creating a bubble of focused silence around them. In his lap rested the original comic script, The 2 Stars, its pages now carefully preserved in acid-free sheet protectors, the childish handwriting and crude illustrations protected while remaining visible. He hadn't looked at it for several months, having been immersed in production of Faithful, which had wrapped filming just 2 weeks earlier. The bench's inscription remained clear and elegant. Micah Dawson, friend, dreamer, writer, kept the light on. And beside it, Keanu Reeves, still keeping the promise? As he had hoped when suggesting the memorial, the bench had become more than merely decorative. Throughout his quiet observation period, various people had used it. An elderly woman resting briefly during her walk, a teenager writing earnestly in a journal, a father reading to his young daughter. The bench served its practical purpose while carrying deeper significance for those who knew its story. Keanu opened the preserved script to a random page. The scene described 2 young adventurers discovering a hidden cave containing a map of the stars, unlike any found in their astronomy books. The childish dialogue was marked by exclamation points and improbable scientific claims, but beneath the narrative simplicity lay a profound theme: that the universe might contain patterns and possibilities invisible to conventional observation. Some things have to be believed before they can be seen, one character explained to the other. The line, written in Micah's more precise handwriting, had been circled and starred, evidently recognized even then as something significant. Keanu ran his finger lightly over the protective covering, tracing the path of words written nearly 5 decades earlier. They had been children playing at creation, unaware that their imagined story contained elements that would prove prophetic in their actual lives. Separation, faith maintained across absence. Reunion that transcended ordinary limitations. A gentle breeze rustled the oak leaves above, drawing his attention upward. The tree was massive. Not the same one where they had made their promise, but similar in its solid presence, its silent witnessing of human lives unfolding beneath its branches. Trees, unlike people, measured time differently. Decades registered merely as rings hidden within their cores, visible only when the living structure was cut open. His phone vibrated with a text from Claire. At the restaurant, waiting, found our old booth. He smiled, remembering how Micah's daughter had become such a vital part of his life. Through her, The connection with his childhood friend had evolved into something neither of them could have imagined beneath that oak tree 50 years ago. A young couple approached the bench, hesitating when they recognized him. The woman finally spoke. "Excuse me, but is this the bench from the 2 Stars? About your childhood friend?" Keanu nodded, appreciating their respectful approach. "Your story inspired us to find people we'd lost touch with," the man explained. "My wife reconnected with her best friend from elementary school. We're still looking for my cousin, but we haven't given up." "That's what matters," Keanu said, standing with the script in his hands. "Not giving up on the connections that shaped you." As they walked away, Keanu realized how the private story of his friendship with Micah had expanded beyond its original boundaries, touching lives, inspiring reconnections, creating ripples that continued to spread in ways neither could have imagined as children. Near the park entrance, he passed a young boy sitting cross-legged on the grass, writing intently in a spiral notebook. The scene reminded him of Micah, of how writing had been his way of preserving their connection across time and distance. Perhaps this boy, too, was writing to maintain something precious, to create a bridge across some form of separation. Keanu paused at the gate, looking back at the bench, the oak tree, the path that wound through the park. In that moment, he felt Micah's presence not as a ghost, but as an enduring influence, a voice that had never truly fallen silent, a connection that had never actually been broken. He thought of Claire's Letters to the Lost program, now helping hundreds of young people transform absence into meaning. He thought of the film they had created together, carrying Micah's story to audiences who might recognize in it echoes of their own unfinished conversations, their own interrupted connections. "Some friends disappear," he whispered, echoing the words he had recorded for the film's final sequence. "Some promises drift into silence, but the ones that matter, they echo, even across a lifetime." The path ahead led back to the busy street, to the restaurant where Claire waited, to the continued unfolding of a story that had begun beneath a different oak tree half a century earlier. But the essence remained unchanged. A promise kept, a friendship honored, a connection that had proven stronger than circumstance, distance, or even death. As Keanu walked away, the late afternoon light cast his elongated shadow across the ground, stretching back toward the bench as if reluctant to leave. Much like memory itself, extending between present and past, between presence and absence, between what is and what once was. In the end, what remained wasn't regret for the years lost, but gratitude for the connection preserved. Through Micah's faithful waiting, through Claire's determined searching, through Keanu's willingness to remember and recognize. What had begun as a childhood promise had evolved into something far more profound, a testament to how deeply we carry each other, even when separated by time, distance, or the ultimate boundary between life and death. Some connections don't need direct lines to remain true. They live in the spaces between what we know and what we believe, between what we've lost and what we keep. If there's someone in your life who once mattered deeply, someone who disappeared into the fog of time and circumstance, perhaps they're still carrying you with them, just as you carry them. They might be waiting to be found, or maybe, in some quiet way, they've been with you all along. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe, because someone out there might still be waiting to be found. Fade to black. The screen glows with 2 stars drawn by 2 boys long ago.